Chapter 9, 51. Vitaly, Spalovsky, Pelagia, Mosvina, they were the ascendants who had once stood at the peak of the road of change. They had inherited the existence of black god Chernobyl and white god Beloberg. They were the embodiment of the world's evil and all the pure good. If they could survive until now, they would probably be several generations older than Russell. In fact, they had entered as the second batch of members in the early days of the Republic. It was because of them that the Silver Sea was able to completely isolate Busheuen's demonic corrosion and the Pied Piper's solidification transformation at its weakest early stage. At the same time, it was also because their existence was so important that they were the first to be attacked by the Golden Dawn when the Kingdom of Heaven fell. Half of the ascendants of the Road of Change were swept into the broken Kingdom of Heaven and dissolved into fragments. The other half of the survivors were separated by the rescue team that came later and were unexpectedly stabbed in the back. In the end, only the last fragment, left behind by Black God and White God after they abandoned everything, the mirror of day and night. When Pelagia completely burned out the authority of the White God, the only thing left was the Philosopher's Stone, which was filled with hatred and madness for everything. The surviving Vitaly also paid a huge price to protect the students who had dissolved in the records. In the end, his mind deteriorated and his consciousness was incomplete. He was like a child. The small village in the mirror image was the last shelter left behind by the White God. It was the final resting place of the shattered souls. To Vitaly, everyone's existence was the most precious treasure in the world. After Huaishur passed the trial, he was allowed to enter and successfully brought back Anna's soul. In addition to the choice of Anna's parents, the tacit consent of the incomplete Black God was also indispensable. To be able to give him such heavy trust after being stabbed in the back by his companions. Even Russell couldn't do it. In the end, it's all because of you, Russell said. It's not your book that he trusts, but yourself. Why? Huaishur was stunned. I didn't do anything. Don't underestimate Black God's foresight. Russell smiled. The moment the day and night mirror shone on you, he had already seen through your essence, whether it was what you showed or what you hid. Your mirror image would not keep a secret for you. It was precisely because of this that she placed such precious hopes on him. It was also because of this that he hated Huaishur so much. Out of everyone, perhaps Vitaly was the only one who hoped that Huaishur wouldn't be able to pass the trial, because once Huaishur succeeded, it would be time for him to part with his treasure. No matter how outstanding a teacher is, in the end, he will only be a passerby in the student's life. Russell stared at the blood-dripping church outside the window. It was as if he could see the silhouette of the person praying with lowered eyes. Traveling together, accompanying each other, guiding the way to the distance. But there will be a time when we part. There will be a companion waiting ahead. Therefore, you don't have to feel too much pressure. You just have to do your best. That's enough. Whether it's Kadia or Mr. Vitaly, they all have confidence in you. Huaishur lowered his head and ate his breakfast in silence. After finishing the bacon and fried egg on the plate, he put down his fork. After a long time, he sighed softly. Only now did I realize that the home visit has already been done. I have no choice but to admit it. I've already said that you have the potential. Russell patted him on the shoulder and turned to leave. In the silence, Huaishur looked at the cars coming and going outside the window. Suddenly, he turned back and looked at the girl quietly waiting behind the crack. "Hey, Anna, can you drive?" "Yes." Behind the wall, the girl peeked her head out again as if she had been discovered playing hide-and-seek. She blinked her eyes. "Just call me Anya. Then go and prepare your luggage. Anya." Huaishur said, "The journey full of arrangements is about to begin." Basking in the morning sun, he leaned on the chair and quietly enjoyed the last moment of leisure. He sighed silently. He felt that he was not very qualified as a teacher. After being away for so long, he wondered how the students at home were doing. Huaisher took out his phone. He dialed the number expectantly. 10 minutes later, the well-behaved Yuan received the concern from her teacher. And the joy of the little cabin in the woods, who was trying to muddle through, was doubled amidst the long-awaited cries. Huaisher happily put down his phone and smiled. He felt that the teacher-student relationship had become more stable. Under the afternoon sun, the huge transport plane whistled as it took off. Loaded with huge war weapons and black-clothed priests and soldiers, it flew into the distance. Next to the runway, the orderly soldiers gathered in a square formation, with their heads held high, waiting for orders from their commanding officer. First, Volgograd, then transit through the border of the ice field, and finally to the wilderness to set up defenses. The left and right are the guards. Russell seemed to know the whereabouts of the soldiers like the back of his hand. He leaned on the chair in the lounge and commented on the troops below one by one. He also pointed out to Huaisher the group of solemn and cold cultivators in linen clothes at the front. Look, that's the real elite, the combat company of the Benevolent Knights, all of them sublimated. They should be reinforcements going to the front line of hell. This time, the Russian Federation was obviously stimulated by Dongxia's battle in the Blessed Land a few years ago. They planned to take advantage of the War of the Worlds to launch another glorious expedition to the east, even though he did not hear any gunshots or see any swords. But when those huge fighting forces slowly passed through the floor-to-ceiling window, Huaisher could feel an imminent sense of crisis, as if the war was slowly approaching. Huaisher asked, not only defense, but also counterattack to hell? Of course, more hell is excavated, more materials and power. The War of the Worlds is not only a crisis of the present realm, but also an opportunity to replenish the present realm's development power. Every War of the Worlds can bring a huge amount of resources for the major lineages. Everyone is already rubbing their hands and can't wait. Huaisher flipped through his phone and saw the pop-up message on tomorrow's news. Dongxia headline: The Dragon Vein has begun the preheating stage. The Chunjun project may be online. The attached picture was a photo of the spokesperson, Dieting. As for the series of political words below, he was too lazy to look at it. Even if he was traveling, he could still feel it. Hell was gradually heating up, causing the cauldron of the present realm to boil, and the undercurrent from the deeper levels began to surface. And a series of changes had also been triggered in the present realm. According to the report in the cabin in the forest, Ingzhou had officially begun the liquidation of the remaining forces of the general, and everyone in the looming mansion was in danger. But Rijian's stinky sister, Hupa, was in the limelight and was expected to become the right minister as the king of Anfang. The revival of the Rijian family was a foregone conclusion, and America also began a new round of blood sacrifice to the god of cruelty at its borders, and in hell, using the blood of hell to create miracles. In Rome, the Hall of the Pharaoh was operating day and night. New decrees were issued, and the guards wore the badge of a staff and an axe as they rushed around. In India, with the support of their natural enemy, the Green Neck, the creation lineage finally suppressed the maintenance lineage and the destruction lineage, and took over power with a slight advantage. With the bloodshed and destruction, the priests and elders from various monasteries finally formed a united front. The only one that didn't have any news was the Egyptian lineage. But the Egyptian lineage had always been shrouded in fog and rarely revealed to the public. The information revealed every year was neither light nor heavy. Occasionally, a prince would be executed for violating the precepts, but the outside world would only hear about it after half a year. Even if the royal family made a big move, the outside world wouldn't know. As for the various bounties offered in the collection of sins, the reward for exploring the graveyard of the returnless hell exploration quest had increased by several times. However, the number of players willing to accept the quest was decreasing. The observers of the bronze eye began to enter and leave various places on the border, observing the depth of the data to supply the computing needs of the rear. The continuation court's various properties also began to frantically transfer funds. As for the Directorate of Defense, all the vacations had been canceled, and everyone began to work the endless 007. It was impossible to die suddenly even if they wanted to. The slightest problem would cause them to be dragged down for an injection and then continue to work overtime. Every time this happened, Huaisher, who was sent out, would take pleasure in other people's misfortune. Dambua's work was all thrown to the students, and the work of the ivory tower was all done by Vice President Isaac. While everyone was complaining in their circle of friends, there was only one person who was as annoying as a stray dog. He kept posting photos and videos of his travels. Who knew how many people he had blocked and blocked? Where are we going next? Huaisher put away his phone and asked. Next, Russell's expression showed a rare trace of seriousness and distress. I always feel that both are troublesome. Egypt or Rome, you pick one. Huaisher looked at him sideways and didn't say anything. He didn't pick. What if he was pushed to the side when the time came? However, just as the two of them were conversing, an ear-piercing alarm suddenly appeared above the military airport. Crimson lights lit up one after another, as if everyone was burning up. The high-pitched gap alarm echoed in their ears. The originally orderly airport was suddenly hit by a sudden impact, but the chaos didn't spread. Soon, under the command of various officers, all the priests and soldiers quickly began to prepare for battle. Huaisher's scalp went numb. This was the transportation hub of the Russian Federation, the industrial center, and the capital of the Euro region. Why would there be such an outrageous air raid alarm? Could it be a false alarm? But even if it was a false alarm, it was too outrageous. Any aircraft that wasn't on the safe list would have been shot down from 8,000 kilometers away. Or was it an intercontinental missile? But why was there no premonition of death under such great pressure? Not only on the ground, but also in the sky, figures appeared one after another. Before the battle formation of the Knights of the Benevolent Hall was dressed, the canonized saints had already arrived in the sky above the airport through the Holy Coffin network. Then Huaisher, who was in front of the window, caught a glimpse of the spectacular scene of the sky shattering. In the rainbow light that fell from the sky, many square cracks quickly appeared in the originally blue sky. They cracked, shattered, and separated. And in the darkness behind, under the depth, a huge shadow descended. It enveloped everything. The solemn and luxurious palace was suspended in the sky. In the fierce wind that tore through the troposphere, it slowly descended. Countless lush greenery emerged from the palace, and the flow of the waterfall could vaguely be seen. Countless guards in golden armor stood on the walls of the palace, and 16 huge bugles sounded the thunder of the arrival of the Supreme One. It was a miracle handed down from generation to generation, the noble carriage that belonged to the great emperor, the embodiment of the glory and brilliance of Rome. Sky Courtyard, Sybaris. This is F. Astra's king, outrageous. Huaisher suddenly lost his voice. Chapter 952. Without any notification or diplomatic note, the palace of the Roman emperor appeared above the Russian Federation without any warning, directly above the military airport. It was a terrible scene that could be regarded as a declaration of war at any time. At this moment, after a short period of noise and chaos, everything quickly returned to order. It was as if nothing had happened. The decision from the patriarchs reached Ural. It was just an annoying neighbor visiting. There was no need to make a fuss. Everything was operating as usual. Soon, the two imperial guards who had obtained permission to land were holding axes that represented authority. They wore golden armor and walked into their lounge with their heads held high. After looking around, they ignored Anna, who was behind Huaishur, and stopped in front of them. "Mr. Russell, His Majesty invites you in." His Majesty? Huaishur was a little sluggish. "Which His Majesty? Pay attention to your wording, Mr. Huaishur." The imperial guard looked stern and said proudly, "In Rome, there is only one honorable His Majesty, and the people only have one supreme emperor." Huaishur's vision turned black. The current Roman emperor, the sixth Titus in history, was in the courtyard in the sky and wanted to meet Russell. "No, you are an emperor, the Lord of Rome. Why did you come to the Russian Federation repeatedly for this? What are you doing?" The occupation of an emperor can be really scary when he is childish sometimes. Russell shook his head self-deprecatingly. "I was thinking of flipping a coin. Now it seems that His Majesty will not allow the coin to have a picture of himself next to him, right?" Before he flipped the coin followed the will of the emperor and gave the result. "Follow me." "Why, sure." Russell waved to the students behind him and his students. "I will take you to the courtyard in the sky to broaden your horizons." The imperial guards quietly made way for them. They respectfully welcomed the arrival of the emperor's distinguished guests. It was clear that the current generation had better choices, better helicopters, and more convenient methods. However, the Romans still followed the rules of the past and chose a method that did not have any quality-price ratio. They chose the golden carriage to go back and forth, and they were proud of it. When one truly stood in front of the majestic watchtower in midair, one could feel a pressure and exclamation that one couldn't feel on the ground. This extravagant palace soared in the sky without any weapons or equipment. It was purely for the purpose of showing off its luxurious and glorious beauty. Even the mirror-like marble slabs under his feet were inlaid with golden patterns and reliefs. There were countless works of art and exquisite decorations that could be seen. It was as if he was surrounded by all the beautiful things in the world. Gold, flowers, and beauties, it was a feast for the eyes. The servants who came and went were all dressed in white silk robes. They were robust and handsome, and their faces were beautiful. The beautiful women who were filled with all kinds of amorous feelings were dazzling. His attentive service was even more meticulous. However, when the servant bowed his head, Huaishur raised his hand and patted the back of Anna's head without looking back. "Don't always look at his neck." "I didn't look." The girl quibbled. "How do you know that I looked?" "Because I was looking too." Huaishur glanced back at her. "I also know that you looked 1 centimeter too low." Anna glared at him and said nothing in anger. The servants served him respectfully. Although he couldn't understand what they were talking about, he inexplicably felt a little cold on his neck. The corner of the eyes of the ceremonial officer who followed him twitched slightly. He was expressionless and pretended not to hear such a disrespectful conversation. The deeper they went, the more gorgeous everything they saw along the way. In the end, Huaishur was almost numb. But when the last door opened in front of him, he still couldn't help but be stunned, because thick water vapor spewed out from the crack of the door, accompanied by the sound of water splashing, singing, and the roar of the waterfall. The pure white marble wall was flawless, and the carved beast head on the wall was constantly spewing warm water from the highest platform. And the burning spices in the copper stove made the air dense with rich warmth. In the melodious melody of the live musicians, Huaishur was now in front of a bathhouse. His Huaisher sucked in a breath of the cold air behind the door. Suddenly, he had an illusion that he didn't come to the palace of the Roman emperor, but accidentally entered a northeast bathhouse. He subconsciously reached out, wanting to take a card, wash up, and soak for a while in the pool. After a sauna, he went up to take a big bath and finally a buffet meal, and then he could fall asleep. Is there something wrong with your palace? Huaisher couldn't help but imagine the scene of the emperor lying on the massage bed and enjoying a massage. The diligent masseuse skillfully patted the emperor's but after rubbing his back, indicating that the emperor should turn over. That was too exciting. What are you doing? Huaisher, change your clothes. Russell, who had already walked to the changing room, waved at Huaisher. Bathing is a part of Roman culture that must be experienced. This is a VIP reception. What are you hesitating for? Could it be that you're thinking of something embarrassing? Then you'll be disappointed. The old man laughed and walked in through the door. Huaisher's expression twitched. To be honest, he was not ready to be honest with this old man. After hesitating for a long time, he changed his clothes a little helplessly. But when he turned back, his eyes paused on Russell's back. The thin old man had wrapped a bath towel around his body. His naked upper body was covered with a layer of shocking burn marks and 2 crisscrossing scars. The texture of the skin was clearly visible. Even after a long time, it had not been completely healed, and on the back that was covered with scars, a solemn and dignified outline was engraved. The pitch-black giant tree was divided into 9 forks, representing the 9 great kingdoms. Those horizontal branches with sharp edges and corners entangled with each other, turning into a huge totem that seemed to encompass the entire world. The world tree, with the Mimir spring as the source, it evolved into a great miracle. This was the symbol of all the true knowledge in the world. And sensing Huaisher's gaze, Russell just smiled indifferently and glanced at him. Your figure is not bad, but it's a little too white. You need more sun. How about I lend you my tanning box for a few days? No need. Huaisher shook his head and felt melancholy. Unless he found an abyss stylist to recuperate, he would never get tanned in this life. He would always be a pretty boy. And just as they followed the attendant, just as they stepped out of the door and stepped onto the steps leading to the top, they heard an impatient, hoarse voice coming from the highest place. Too slow. Russell, I've been waiting for you for a long time. On the highest platform, where all the beautiful scenery could be seen at a glance, there was a wide and huge bath. The person who spoke had his back to them, casually reached out, took a glass of wine from the attendant's tray, raised his head, and drank it in one gulp. He looked about 30 years old, but his temples were already gray. His long hair draped over his shoulders, and his face was still stained with water droplets. Just like that, he sat in the gorgeous bath without any concealment, his arms casually resting on the edge of the bath. It was hard to imagine that he was the supreme ruler of Rome, the ruler of authority, the king of lineage, and the most honorable emperor in the entire territory. At this moment, he looked back at the 2 people behind him and seemed to be joking. How dare you make the emperor wait for so long? It's disrespectful. What came out of his mouth was clearly Latin, but when it reached Huaisher's ears, what sounded from his soul was the Dongxia voice that was extremely familiar to him. Being stared at by that pair of dark eyes, his heart instinctively tightened. Even if there was no killing intent or disgust, his intuition kept sending out alarms, as if telling him that everything in the world was in the hands of this man. Subconsciously, he wanted to bury the bath scene that he had just imagined. He added 2 shovels of soil, wishing he could flatten it. If someone found out, he was afraid that he would be beheaded after the VIP bath. Russell still calmly stepped forward, bowed slightly, and responded with a smile, "Thank you for waiting for so long, Your Majesty. However, before meeting the Emperor, how can I not prepare more?" No matter how prepared you are, or if you are afraid of trouble, It doesn't matter. The emperor shook his head casually. Since you didn't come to see me, I simply came to see you. It was as if opening his palace to the military base in the 5 continents was like going for a walk after breakfast. He was extremely calm and not surprised at all. Instead, he opened his arms to show off, pointed at the palace in front of him, and asked proudly, "How do you feel? Luo Su, is this temporary imperial residence of mine beautiful?" "It's the only one in the world. It's beautiful." Russell nodded and praised from the bottom of his heart. Then Titus laughed, and the solemn atmosphere disappeared. He glanced at Huaishur behind Russell and waved his hand. "Don't be reserved. Enjoy as much as you want. There is no difference in status here. Being able to enjoy this moment is not a waste of my hospitality." Naturally, it should be so. Russell had already taken off his bath towel and stepped into the bath. He stretched his body comfortably and lay down in the warm pool. Huaishur's eyes twitched. Beside him, he didn't know whether to go into the water or not. He looked at the two of them awkwardly. Then he realized that in the bath, Titus was also naked. Thinking of the habits and customs of the Romans of the past generations, he was a little afraid. What if the emperor was on a whim and coveted his beauty and ordered him to perform swordsmanship? What should he do? However, Titus had already raised his eyes and looked over again with a faint smile. "Oh, kid, you seem to admire my jade body." His Majesty the Emperor's mouth curled up and waved at him. "If you want to compete with me, come on. I'll give you the honor of looking up to me. It's also one of the duties of an emperor to teach the ignorant to receive dignity." Ha ha! Before he could finish his sentence, he started laughing to himself. Obviously, he was very confident in his victory. Huaishur couldn't help but shrink back a little. Forget it. Forget it. He waved his hand and coughed twice. Compared to His Majesty the Emperor, this little strength of mine is really insignificant. The leaders were taking a bath happily. He wasn't stupid enough to argue with them. It wouldn't be good to win or lose. You win, okay, that's true. Titus seemed to be very appreciative of Huaishur's self-awareness. He pinched his chin and praised, "I like young people like you. If it weren't for those boring guys in the Directorate of Command who made things difficult, I would have asked you to be under my command." Shocking. It turned out that he had been targeted for a long time. Huaishur felt a chill at the back of his head and suddenly felt a little scared. His chastity was in danger. Chapter 953. After teasing Huaishur with a few words, Titus did not say anything else. Instead, he changed the topic and talked to Russell about other things: romance, cutting-edge technology, and even fine wine and delicacies. He did not even neglect the insignificant Huaishur next to him. It made one feel like a spring breeze. Just like what he had promised before, there was no superiority in the bathroom, and he was not so bored as to insist on using the two of them to demonstrate the supreme authority of the emperor. It could be seen that His Majesty had profound attainments and insights in both performance and food. He even seemed to have paid attention to a small place like Danbois. He even had some understanding of Anna's situation. So that's how it is. It has been completed again. In that case, the path of transformation can also be passed down. The efforts of the Pioneer Association in the past will not be buried. This is really a good thing. Titus looked at the pool below and stared at the girl who jumped down from the springboard. He was full of admiration. "You have planted a new seed, Russell. I believe you will soon usher in a year of harvest, right?" "How is this my credit?" Russell smiled and said, "It should be my student's achievement. That is his student, so it should also be his result. Isn't this the reason why humans pass it down from generation to generation?" Titus shook his head. Bloodline, knowledge, spirit, pain, and ideals, there is no superiority in inheritance. If you ask me, it is precisely because you still choose such a path with free will after breaking away from the shackles of bloodline that it is even more admirable. The glory of the Republic still continues on you. This is something that I have witnessed with my own eyes. Russell, there is no need to be humble. Just accept it with pride. He slowly got up from the bath and took a bath towel from the guard. After casually wiping himself, he looked back at the two of them. It's time for lunch. You want to join me? The Emperor's invitation and the delicacies of the Golden Palace. No one can refuse these two reasons. Russell nodded happily. Admittedly, this lunch was the most extravagant and exquisite meal Huaishur had ever eaten. There was no need to mention the delicious food. The guests were enthusiastic, and the atmosphere was warm. However, Huaishur felt that the atmosphere at the banquet was becoming more and more solemn, and she felt that she could not eat. On the other hand, it was Russell who was eating and drinking. He was chatting and laughing as if he was attending a buffet for a charity fund. After a joyous and harmonious lunch, those who were fortunate enough to attend the meeting politely excused themselves. After the waiter took down all the plates and replaced them with drinks for the guests, the waiter said, without waiting for Russell's opening remarks, Titus swirled the wine glass in his hand and said straightforwardly, "Let's not waste any more time. Russell, let me ask you, are you preparing to reorganize the celestial genealogy?" It was so abrupt and direct that he placed the most important question at the forefront. In front of the Supreme Emperor, fancy lies and hypocritical guarantees were useless. This was the dialogue between the emperor and the professor, the head of the genealogy of Rome, and the remaining descendants of the Utopia. It was enough to determine their next stance and whether they would extend a helping hand or take measures. Russell did not evade the question. "That's exactly what I'm doing." "Very good." Titus nodded approvingly. Since that hairless old snake and that group of monks who only know how to chant scriptures have already placed their bets, I won't be stingy. Without any conditions, the emperor generously promised, "State your request, and Rome will satisfy you. Financial resources, material resources, new blood, and assistance. As long as it's not excessive, I can give it to you. Thank you for your generosity, but I don't have anything I desire from Rome." After pondering for a moment, Russell raised his head and said, "However, can I ask your majesty to release my former companions? If your majesty is willing to show mercy, then I will definitely do my best to repay Rome's generosity." It was unknown what Russell was talking about. At that moment, Huaishur keenly felt that the atmosphere in the room had changed. Not only were the secretaries and attendants not far away shocked, but also the imperial guards guarding in front of the door, as well as Titus's undisguised coldness and displeasure. "Such a request is too ungrateful, Russell." He slowly shook his head. "You should know that Rome has never been kind, and there's a limit to their generosity. I'm well aware." Russell shook his head. "But his existence is an indispensable help to us. He's just one person. Compared to the huge wealth and resources, he's insignificant, isn't he? If it's just one person, there's no need to say anything, but what's at stake is the face of the royal family." In the dead silence, Titus's expression was cold. His fingers tapped on the table in front of him as he stared coldly at Russell's face. However, from the beginning to the end, the old man's calm expression did not change at all. "You've given me a difficult problem, Russell," the emperor said. "You even make me wonder if you're humiliating me." Russell did not turn pale with fright. He just shook his head. "I have no such intention. It's just that this is my purpose, so I didn't dare to rush to your door. If it's not my uncle, it's fine if I let you take him away. However, after all, the slightest mistake will cause the royal family to lose their decorum. Titus paused for a moment, then asked solemnly, "Do you understand what I mean?" "Of course." Russell raised his head and solemnly promised, "I will bear all the consequences." "That's how it should be." Titus warned solemnly, "Russell, if anything happens to my uncle, you'll have to face the wrath of Rome." Russell smiled. "If it really comes to that, I'll offer my head to ask for forgiveness." "Ask for forgiveness?" "Ha, Mimir's head is worth collecting, but unfortunately I'm not interested." Titus asked again, "Russell, although you don't have any request for Rome, Rome has a request for you. Since the celestial genealogy is going to be rebuilt, what do you plan to do with the Golden Dawn?" "Aren't we enemies from the beginning? There's no other choice to talk about, right?" Russell replied, "There's only life and death." "Very well." Titus finally raised the wine glass in his hand. "Then let's drink to our heart's content. I hope you can achieve something." The cold wine slid down his throat, but it burned like a flame. The convulsive pain and the oath were engraved into the bone marrow. "Since the matter has been discussed, you should leave." Titus got up and left. "Rome will fulfill its promise to you, and I hope you will do the same." It was like an illusion. Huaishur actually caught a glimpse of melancholy in the Supreme Emperor's eyes the moment he turned around. Soon, an attendant walked up to him. After receiving the order, he took Russell to the depths of the floating courtyard. In the gorgeous courtyard full of birds and fragrant flowers, Huaishur followed the attendant and walked into a courtyard hidden behind layers of beautiful scenery. From the outside, it looked like a library with many books, brimming with the aura of knowledge. However, the attendant didn't go any further. After bringing them here, he left. Only Huaishur and Russell were left standing in front of the door. "So, you refused the Emperor's help and wanted him to release your friend?" Huaishur asked in confusion. "The Emperor's uncle?" "Yes, he is one of the adopted sons of Titus' grandfather, Aulus, and the one with the highest achievements. If it weren't for his refusal, Aulus would have even considered including him in the category of successors. He alone is better than thousands of soldiers and horses." Huaishur, recalling his old friend in the Utopia, Russell could not help but smile. Marcus Sicinius Fronto Aulus. He was once an indispensable member of the Utopia. He was knowledgeable, elegant, and handsome. What was even rarer was that he was reliable and reassuring. He was a real prince. To be honest, there was a time when young girls' eyes turned red when they saw him. Unfortunately, he got married early. After his wife died of illness, he did not remarry. He devoted all his energy to his work and remained single until now. His loyalty is admirable. "What does he do?" Huaishur asked. "A sublimator, an alchemist, or a scholar?" "Neither. He is the best diplomat, the former spokesperson of the Utopia." Russell said solemnly, "There is no one more suitable for that position than him. Thanks to his existence and protection, the celestial genealogies, many interests in the present realm and Inferno were recognized and guaranteed. The friction, negotiations, and visits between genealogies were all his domain. Even the war between the two rulers, Eve Lit and Leviathan, was mediated by him. Unlike me, who only knows how to talk, he is a person who can gain the trust and respect of his opponents, no matter where he goes. Even in the domain of the Withered King, he is the most distinguished guest." Huaishur was already ashamed of his inferiority before he heard the whole story. "So this is the gap between the realms. At best, I'm just selling my body, but the other party has already built up his reputation and has connections in both the present realm and Inferno. Isn't he a combination of Ban Chao and Wang Xuanzi?" Huaishur asked. Russell thought for a moment and nodded. "Then you have to add Richelieu and Talleyrand." Huaisher had never seen anyone who could earn such respect from Russell, but because of this he became more and more puzzled. If he's so powerful, why is he hidden here? Does he know too much? Russell's footsteps paused. He wanted to say something, but stopped. There was the sound of the door being pushed open. Just as the two of them were talking, the old man who was organizing the books in the library heard the noise outside and pushed the door open. When he saw the two of them, he was stunned. Russell? His slightly weathered face was not as old as Russell's, but looked like he was only in his 40s. His dark eyes were filled with a gentle light, without any hesitation. Only his white waist-length hair revealed his long age. Even if he was simply wearing a white robe, he gave off an indescribable feeling of nobility. It was a graceful bearing that Huaisher did not have, but his expression was not arrogant, but elegant and gentle, which made people feel good about him. Seeing the visitors standing in the courtyard, the old man, who had lived in seclusion for a long time, was not filled with disgust and displeasure like his other companions. On the contrary, he did not hide his surprise and joy. On the contrary, Russell's expression was complicated, and he sighed, "Long time no see, Marcus." Marcus did not even care about the ancient scroll in his hand. He threw it aside, walked up with a big smile, opened his arms, and hugged him tightly. "Long time no see. Russell, how have you been?" Russell. Huaisher. No one responded, only an awkward silence. The scene of an old friend reuniting was obviously so touching, but the problem was Huaisher could not understand why the old man was hugging him. Chapter 954. Huaisher was dumbfounded, feeling Marcus' warm embrace. He wanted to say something, but hesitated. He looked at Russell with eyes full of confusion. "What the hell? What's going on?" It's a long story." Russell pressed his forehead and sighed helplessly. After a long time, Marcus finally let go of his embrace, but before Huaisher could react, he held Huaisher's hand again, as if afraid that he was an illusion that would disappear at any time. "Unbelievable. Russell, you've become a lot younger," he said in shock. "Even your race has changed." Huaisher didn't know how to answer. Marcus seemed to have finally understood something. He took a step back, looked at Huaisher, and then looked at Russell next to Huaisher. "So that's how it is," he exclaimed in surprise. You actually secretly went for plastic surgery? You even brought a doctor over to introduce him to me? Quick, doctor, give me one that's exactly the same as him." Mr. Marcus, he is not a doctor." "Then is it your father?" "Your father, my ass." Huaisher was angry. "My father died many years ago." Marcus nodded in understanding. "That's right. You told me that your mother died young." "Ahem." After coughing twice, Russell stepped forward and said seriously, "Marcus, we came here for an important matter. You don't have to say anything. I already understand." Marcus interrupted him and muttered to himself, "I can already feel it." Huaisher wanted to take advantage of his muttering to himself to withdraw his hand, but that hand suddenly stretched out and grabbed his wrist again. It was so strong, like an iron clamp. "It's war," Marcus murmured. His dark pupils seemed to be burning with fire. "The smell of war." "Yes, you are planning a war, Russell. I know, a war of life and death. I knew it. I knew it. This time has finally come." He shouted excitedly. "The end of paradise is here." Huaisher was at a loss. He didn't know what he was talking about. "Ahem, Marcus, that the war plan against the ranchers has been canceled," Russell reminded in a low voice. "That plan has been rejected for many years because of insufficient budget, excessive demands, and no possibility." "Who dares?" Marcus suddenly turned around and stared at him. "It's the directorate, right? I knew it was those bastards. And those good-for-nothings from the Continuation Institute." In the long silence, Huaisher turned to look at Russell. His small eyes were big, confused. "You call this gentle and refined?" Do you have some misunderstanding about the Dongsha language? Marcus, calm down, calm down. If it's not the plan to conquer paradise, then it's the green sun sequence? Marcus asked. The development of Hell's borders is about to be realized. Although the green sun has been realized, the development of Hell's borders is still far away. Marcus pondered for a moment and came to a realization again. Could it be that the Golden Dawn project to explore the origin of the abyss is finally about to start? In a sense, but it's not this either. It can't be the descent of heaven, right? Heaven has been gone for so many years. It can't even descend, my friend. Russell sighed. The land of dreams in the data center has sunk into hell. How dare you? Marcus roared, the veins on his face bulging, unable to restrain his anger. This is a great humiliation. Russell, call Vitali, and Orton, let's burn those rebels to ashes. With that, he pulled Huai Shi and rushed out a few steps, but Huai Shi didn't move. Soon, the old man turned back and looked at them angrily. What are you standing there for? Let's go. Vitali and Orton are dead. Marcus, isn't this the obituary you posted yourself? Russell looked at him with pity. The kingdom of heaven no longer exists. All of our grand plans and hopes have vanished without a trace. They have fallen along with our ideals. It's been 70 years. How long are you going to be immersed in this dream? Marcus was stunned on the spot for a long time, as if he couldn't understand what he said. He was like a lost child. He couldn't find the direction, but he could no longer escape reality. If they're all gone, he asked blankly, but where should I go? Russell was silent and didn't answer. Where are you? Russell? Are you Russell? Are you also a figment of my imagination? Just like the past, Marcus muttered blankly. Am I having a relapse again? I'm sorry, I miss you guys. I really miss you guys. He lowered his head, tears already streaming down his face. But I already have nowhere to go. Please tell me, where is my home? It's not an illusion this time. Russell pressed his shoulder and told him seriously, I'm right in front of you, Marcus. I'm here to bring you back. The man covered his face and cried silently. Huai Shi looked away, unable to bear to look anymore. After a long time, when Marcus finally calmed down, he seemed to have turned into a wooden man. He sat on the chair in a daze, silent and silent. It was as if he had lost his soul. What's wrong with him? Huai Shi stood in the distance, looking at the lonely figure, and asked softly, Is he crazy? It was impossible to imagine how much of an impact the fall of Utopia had on him. It had actually caused a sublimator to fall into madness, causing the wise and elegant diplomat of the past to become like this. Yes, he's crazy. Russell lowered his head and smoked a cigarette. After all, he's a Roman. It's not strange that he often has seizures. Have you not seen a lot of crazy Roman royalty? Huai Shi was speechless. This was also a strange rumor that had spread throughout the modern land. Among the emperors of Rome, there was no lack of prominent monarchs and wise people, but there were few exceptions. The more prominent, the wiser, and the more far-sighted they were, the more muddle-headed and tyrannical they would be in their later years. No, it could almost be said that they were crazy. It was fine if they were extremely extravagant, but a few emperors directly set off civil strife and war, pushing Rome to the verge of collapse several times. It was hard to imagine how such coincidences gathered together, almost forming an unwritten tradition. If it was a bloodline defect, it could not be explained. After all, the most important thing in Rome was the throne, but it did not necessarily have to be passed down by bloodline. Several emperors were even slaves or kurfürst, but once they sat on that throne, they would not have a good ending at all. In the past, the emperors were poisoned to death, assassinated, and died of diseases countless times. As for the descendants and relatives of the emperors, there were so many that it was uncountable. Should I say that power makes people crazy? He asked curiously. No, this is a curse. Why, sure. Russell said. The curse of the throne, the weight of the crown, the price of becoming the supreme. In Rome, before the emperors ascended the throne, they would be endowed with the stigmata and miracles of god Jupiter, becoming the master of the Roman genealogy. And at the moment of ascension, he would naturally become the crowned one and inherit the correction value accumulated by all the Roman emperors throughout history. A person, regardless of whether he was an ascender before or not, after going through such a ceremony, would become one of the strongest in the entire modern land. The memories of the emperors of the past, the essence and experience of countless struggles would be available for him to integrate and master. And after 1,000 years, the correction value of Rome had reached more than 300%. This power, coupled with the miraculous engravings and the relics of authority, could already be called a demi-human and demigod. This was not a secret among the upper echelons of the major genealogies, but it was the first time Huaisher learned about it. He was shocked and puzzled. More importantly, since he was so strong, what curse could threaten the emperor? Isn't it only Rome that can destroy Rome? Russell replied. There is no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Why, sure. In addition to inheriting all the correction values, he will also bear the distortion of the entire genealogy and Rome. This is the responsibility of the emperor. One hand held the strongest power in the world, and the other hand held a terrible curse that could poison the whole world. For ordinary people, facing one of them was unbearable, let alone facing both. The moment the emperor put on the crown, his life would enter a countdown. In a long time, until his life, soul, and will were exhausted, he could no longer bear the burden. The pressure brought about by this power and the curse is too great, and it will even spread to the family. The so-called madness is only the best outcome, even if it is not blood-related. As long as there is a familial connection, it is absolutely impossible to get rid of it. What do you think the imperial guards who accompany the emperor do? Is it to protect the strongest emperor in the world? No, it is to protect Rome. If the Senate determines that the emperor has fallen into madness, then the imperial guards are responsible for cutting off the emperor's head to put an end to the solidification and the spread of the disaster. If the emperor confirms that his kin is incurable, then he will have to kill him personally. Marcus being allowed to live until now is already the limit of what Titus can do, apart from the many people who have received his kindness. Because of the stimulation of the fall of the kingdom of heaven, he lost control. Maybe he is disappointed in us, so he has nowhere to go. Russell sighed. In the past, all of us thought he would be different. It was because he was too steady and gentle, making people like him and trust him. He also successfully created a false impression, an illusion that he is very strong. Uncle, he is indeed very strong. The person who spoke was the emperor who had returned. Unknowingly, he had been standing outside the courtyard, quietly looking at the man's back, but he did not step forward. When I was very young, I knew that he was different from the others. Titus turned back and said, "In the palace of Rome, Uncle has always been an anomaly. He is not obsessed with pleasure, does not pursue extravagance, and has never indulged his desires. Without his teachings, I would not be who I am today." He paused and said indifferently, "Russell, it is your fault that he became like this." "Yes." Russell nodded and did not shirk the responsibility. "You have seen him, so you should understand that he is no longer useful and has no value." Titus asked again, "Do you still insist on your original idea?" "Yes," Russell responded solemnly. "If he is not there, the reconstruction of celestial genealogy is meaningless. That is his home, your majesty, the home he chose for himself." "Then take him back." Titus was silent for a long time and said softly, He is my teacher and my most respected elder. If he wants to go home, I cannot stop him. He is very old, Russell. Dementia, madness, amnesia, and unclear consciousness. He does not even remember me, his nephew, but he still remembers you. I will not ask you how to make him realize his value, nor do I intend to ask you to build a meticulous nursing home for him. I only hope that all his sacrifices can be meaningful. His death can be valuable. It must be so. Russell nodded solemnly. So, in the silence of parting, the Emperor walked to the old man's side, bent down, held his hand, kissed his cheek for the last time, and hugged him. "Uncle, you can go home." He said goodbye softly. "I will miss you." Marcus was sluggish for a long time, as if he understood something, and smiled happily. Titus was silent, gave him a final hug, and turned away. He never looked back. Chapter 9:55. When Huai and the others returned from the sky courtyard, there was another person in the team. In the wheelchair pushed by Anna, the curious old man kept looking around. He had no idea where he was going. Occasionally, he would mumble and repeat what Russell told him. Go home. Huai carried a bag of luggage for him, and the rest of the items would be sent directly to the ivory tower by Rome. When he stood on the airport runway again, he couldn't help but feel emotional. After such a short journey and so many experiences, he actually felt a little tired. Where are we going next? Russell didn't answer. He just looked down at the message that popped up on his phone. After a long time, he slowly raised his head with a strange expression. Unfortunately, your journey is temporarily over, Huai. It's over? Huai confirmed it again and again, but he still couldn't understand. What does this mean? Originally, he was prepared to be taken to the pit by this guy and be used as a tool again, but there was no result yet. Why did it suddenly end without any beginning or end? He had seen the beginning, but he didn't let him see the ending. Wasn't this a bit too much? Even if it was a road movie, the audience would have to refund their tickets. Can't help it. There are always accidents. Russell was helpless. I wanted to take you to Egypt at the end and see if I could get lucky and ask the pharaoh to give you a prophecy. But now it seems like you won't have that kind of luck. He said, I'll take Marcus with me. You have other work to do. Wait, you don't plan to go to Doomsday? Huai said that if he passed by Xinhai, he would go to the Special Affairs Department to cause trouble for his good brother, Old Fu. How come this happy plot was gone? Doomsday? Doomsday is the least of our worries. Russell laughed and pointed at Huai. Their answer is you, right? Let's not talk about Xian Niao's support. Chu Hai's son, the next leader of the Social Security Bureau, and Lady Lotus are also training you. The Yuan clan and the Lin clan even took the initiative to bet on you. Furthermore, the Dombwa School District had already completed a deep cooperation with Dongsha. Everyone already had common interests. As long as you exist, Eastern Summer's attitude will not change. Huai was dumbfounded for a long time. Following this logic, he suddenly realized that he seemed to have become the bridge between Dongsha and celestial genealogy. Could this also be the foresight of the mystic bird? He was horrified. In hindsight, that might be the case, but doesn't the Eastern Summer's Xian Niao like to guide newcomers? It's beneficial, but not costly, and the benefits are endless. Moreover, the eye of life isn't just for show. Even if it can only look at the big picture, it should be able to see your potential. Seizing the opportunity to make a wave of angel investments is simply a sure win. When Russell said this, he immediately became enraptured. You should also pay attention. In the future, if you meet any potential ascenders, just give them something. If you don't have anything on hand, just give them a letter of acceptance from our university. It's better than money. Just a few years in college will give you a lifetime of benefits. Wow, isn't this too utilitarian? Huaishur was shocked by the darkness of the adult world. Bullsh asterisk T. This is called timely help, okay? Russell rolled his eyes at him. But from what I see, you're quite good at this. I don't need to remind you. I'm just telling you that as the secretary of the principal's office, you can sign the acceptance letter as you wish. As for how to use it, it's up to you. It doesn't matter whether you burn it for fun or send it to children. Huaishur was suspicious. Aren't you afraid that I'll mess around? Will you? Russell asked back, leaving Huaishur speechless. See, Huaishur, Russell smiled proudly. Your sense of responsibility is stronger than you think, much stronger. Perhaps your parents have set a bad example for you, causing you to overdo it. But after all, a person's energy is limited. Sometimes appropriate coldness and ruthlessness is also one of the survival philosophies of adults. He said, before loving others, you should love yourself more. What is this? Huaishur asked unhappily. A parting message? It doesn't matter if it's not worth mentioning. Russell shook his head and sat on the steps next to the track. He didn't care about his custom-made suit pants. When he rolled up his sleeves, he smoked a cigar and lazily basked in the sun. It was like a bear climbing out of a tree hole after the end of winter. The skinny man sighed with envy at the spring in front of him. Actually, I've been thinking, he said, about what I should teach you. Didn't you teach a lot? Negotiation and decision-making? That's not the point. At best, it's just a little trick to kill time. It's not really important. Russell shook his head. As your teacher, as a former preparatory recorder, Huaishur, I should teach you something. I should teach you something really useful and valuable, but I don't know how to do it. Russell spread out his hands and shook his head in self-mockery. Everything I've learned and prepared in my entire life, I don't even have the chance to show it off. I've never tested it myself, so how can I teach it to others? I have a lot of schemes, ambitions, and delusions, but you won't be interested. I can teach you how to be a good principal, how to control the budget and cost, how to expand the business, and win people's hearts. But I'm afraid you won't be satisfied. After thinking about it, I can only take you out to see the world and introduce you to my old friends one by one. I hope your future will be smoother. I thought I would be firm and without hesitation. But as I walked compared to the achievements of others, I began to feel ashamed and worried about gains and losses. I was afraid that I would encounter some problems that I couldn't solve and lose face in front of my students as a teacher. Huaishur shook his head. Doesn't everyone respect you? Even the Emperor of Rome treated you with courtesy. No, that's not respect. That's politeness. Huaishur. Russell smoked and replied calmly, respect is for the noble, so they left it to the former utopia. But politeness is different. They are so polite because they don't care. But it's natural for them to not care. This is very rational because this is the current situation of celestial genealogy. After discarding the past glory, a declining organization, a divided genealogy, and an unremarkable second-rate organization, after many years, pain and achievements have gradually withered, and they can only clean up the mess in such a sorry state. Wash blood with blood. A hoarse roar suddenly sounded. In the wheelchair, the old man who was holding the coffee cup suddenly widened his eyes. The coffee cup in his hand was crushed, and the hot liquid flowed down his fingers to his blanket, leaving a trail of rising flames. In the sudden fury, the dull old man roared at the air with all his might, "Traitors will eventually die of blood loss." Huaishur was stunned. Russell, on the other hand, chuckled softly. He stepped forward, pried open Marcus' fingers, and took out the coffee shards. After wiping away the stains, he changed the blanket for him and covered it again. Look, you've said too many discouraging words. Even the senile old man can't stand it anymore. He patted his old friend on the shoulder. Don't worry, Marcus. We're still alive. There's still a long way to go. Rome wasn't built in a day. Gradually, the struggling old man in the wheelchair finally calmed down and returned to the form of a clay sculpture. Where were we just now? Russell asked. Weisher thought for a moment. Clean up the mess. Yes, clean up the mess. Russell took out a handkerchief, wiped his fingers, and told him calmly, this is what we need to do now, and it's also the next priority. That's why I have to remind you of the danger. He said, now you're already a signboard of heavenly state. After meeting so many people with me, you'll only be more conspicuous. Many people don't want us to continue to exist, but I run away quickly when I encounter trouble. They can't do anything to me. Therefore, they may target you next. You represent not only yourself, but also the future of celestial genealogy. Whether it was Weisher's existence or the Book of Destiny, to celestial genealogy, they were indispensable. They were even more important than everyone imagined. Isn't this all your fault? Weisher glanced at him. How can you persuade people to pay attention to their safety after pushing them to the teeth of the storm? Do you regret it? No, I don't intend to jump ship. Weisher thought for a moment and smiled helplessly. It's just that the pressure is a bit too much. In the future, won't I have to pay attention to my appearance when eating and sleeping to prevent others from secretly taking photos? No, it's the opposite. Russell shook his head and told him, you need to live more realistically. Why, sure. If you want to cry, cry. If you want to laugh, laugh. Throw the so-called burden of being an idol to the back of your mind. If you're angry, be furious. If you pity, be merciful. Ignore other people's words. You don't even need to humbly accept them on the surface. If you decide that something is necessary, then go ahead and do it. Ignore everything that stands in your way. There was a long silence. Weisher couldn't understand. If you go against the flow like this, you'll be finished sooner or later, right? Listen carefully. Weisher. There are two kinds of leaders. Russell raised two fingers. One is to lead the confused to unite and move forward. The other is to represent and incarnate everyone. The former requires authority and strategy, shrewdness and ambition, and even the necessary tricks and deceit. The latter is simple and more difficult. It only requires everyone to trust without reservation and doubt. You're born to be the latter. You have to stand at the highest point like the sun and let all the people who yearn for you gather to you. Maybe you have doubts about your future, but I can tell you responsibly that it's not fate that chose you. It's you who chose fate. Russell pressed his shoulder and told him word by word, why, sure, this is the only thing I can do for you as a teacher. If the Republic must have a savior, why must it be you? He said, you just need to be yourself because your fate belongs to you. Weisher was stunned. It was the first time he had heard such solemn words from Russell. He felt a little dreamy, but for some reason, he felt much more relaxed. It was as if he had suddenly been freed from the huge shadow of the future. It was as if he had been relieved of a burden. Hearing you say that, I suddenly want to quit. Weisher sighed. Wouldn't it be better to go home and be a salted fish? That doesn't matter. In this day and age, heroes compete for positions. Russell glanced at him indifferently. Can't we save the world without you? Come on, do you think I don't know you? Weisher lowered his head and smiled. He stretched out his hand. After saying so much, where is the arrangement? I'm done with the chicken blood. Where's 007's mission target? I like students like you. You can always understand what the teacher means. Russell smiled. The job this time is very simple. Why, sure. When he said this, His smile made people feel cold all over. There was a hidden ferocity. After ending your own journey, you're going to end another person's journey. There was a person whose life was full of pain. He needed a little help. After getting tired of his poor life, he needed a kind person to help him get rid of all this. Forever. Chapter 956. 3 hours ago, in Iceland. The morning had just passed, and the slightly cold wind blew from the distant mountains, and the birds on the branches flew into the air. In the town, the door of the fast food restaurant was pushed open, making a jingling sound. The boss at the counter looked up, pushed his glasses, and saw a familiar customer. Outside the door, in the light rain, the man with the round-framed tortoiseshell glasses put away his umbrella and put it on the shelf. After stepping on the cushion, he walked in and sat beside the bar. After taking off his hat, his gray hair was revealed. "Good morning, Mr. Liu." The boss with the coffee pot came up and poured him a cup of steaming coffee to dispel the chill. "What do you want today? The usual?" "Yes, another pack of toast." "Take it away." The man called Mr. Liu was slightly old, but his specific age could not be seen. He just held the coffee cup and took a sip, waiting quietly. In this town, many residents were familiar with each other. When they saw him walk in, they greeted him warmly, and he responded gently one by one. Soon, the boss, who returned from the kitchen, put down the plate and packed toast. He was not in a hurry to get busy. In the old jazz song of the jukebox, he chatted casually with Mr. Liu. Anyway, business was leisurely. "It's rare. I've never seen you order toast before." The old boss leaned on the counter and asked curiously, "Why, do you want to try a new taste?" "Yes." Mr. Liu nodded. Life is long. There has to be some new fun. When eating, he was always in a hurry. It was obviously an ordinary fish and chips set, but he still held a knife and fork and ate calmly. There was a kind of gentle beauty. Unlike others, he did not look at his phone when eating, nor did he pay attention to the picture on the TV. He just focused on eating, as if there was a delicious meal in front of him that deserved to be treated seriously. "What day is it today?" After finally putting down the knife and fork, he looked at the strings of colorful lights that were about to be hung in the corner of the shop and asked curiously, "Is it Christmas?" "No, it's still early." The boss smiled and sighed softly. "It's just celebrating the 30th anniversary of the opening of the shop. It's not a big deal." "30th anniversary? So soon?" Mr. Liu nodded slightly and understood. "So, I've been here for more than 30 years. How's Peter? I heard that he just got married a few days ago." "That's right. Living in a big city like London isn't far away, but I don't have much time to come back either. After a few months, when I have a child, I may come back even later." "When are you retiring?" Mr. Liu sipped his coffee slowly. "You're getting old, aren't you? It's about time for someone new to come." The shopkeeper's expression froze for a moment, and he didn't say anything. He seemed to be lost in thought as he looked at the light rain outside the window. The shop gradually quieted down. Soon, there was a vibration on the table. The phone screen next to the coffee cup suddenly lit up, and an unfamiliar phone number popped up. But Mr. Liu did not seem to be in a hurry to pick up the phone. He just drank his coffee quietly. The screen dimmed and lit up, then dimmed again. What was strange was that the number displayed was a jumbled mess, constantly changing. "There's a call," the store manager said. "There's no rush. Let's wait for a while." Mr. Liu stared at the reflection in the coffee cup and said softly, "I still want to be quiet for a while. I'm afraid there won't be such a quiet and leisurely life in the future." He said, "Wait for me to finish drinking. Then take your time." The shopkeeper nodded, wiped his hands on his apron, and walked in the direction of the kitchen. His footsteps were hurried. However, after turning around, he heard the sound of someone falling to the ground behind him. He stiffened on the spot. Under his apron, he gripped the heavy handle of his pistol tightly. Soon, the shop, which was not very spacious, returned to silence again. There was only the hoarse and damaged melody of the gramophone. Finally, the shopkeeper slowly turned around and stared at the man sitting next to the counter drinking coffee. "There's no need to do this," he said. "It's been 30 years, Lu Baiyan. Why do you have to do this?" "It's been 70 years," Lu Baiyan calmly corrected him. "Before I came here, I served 9 years in prison. Then, I lived in London for more than 30 years. It rained every day, and I went back and forth every week. I wore a tracking ring on my leg, and I lived in a specific area. Inspectors would come to visit me at random times. I was like an ornamental animal living in a cheap motel. Later, someone thought I was old, so they let me come here. I went from an ornamental animal to a wild animal. Actually, it's all the same. It's just that I can't see the cage anymore. That chain is still around my neck, and it's been with me for 70 years, until today." Behind him, the residents who had fallen to the ground no longer made a sound. Only countless purple capillaries appeared on their faces, quickly turning into wax. In a few people's hands, their pistols and alarms fell to the ground, and clumps of mold grew on them. The origin substances that spread out were poisonous, causing strange colors to appear on the floor, table, and sofa. They spread rapidly, like a bucket of paint that had been knocked over. The store manager took a step back and subconsciously pinched his collar. "There's no need to contact the surveillance team," Lu Baiyan said. "Before I came here, I already went there." He thought for a moment, then said softly, "Before I came here, I went to a lot of places. Outside the window, the cold and cheerless town was bathed in the rain. There was no longer any sound. The once noisy road was deathly still. Only the store manager's suppressed breathing could be heard." "Are you crazy?" He pressed down on the pistol, the veins on the back of his hand bulging. "You should know that you can't escape. Even if you can live, the rest of your life won't be good. It's the same as staying here. It's all in hell. There's no difference." Lu Baiyan put down the cup in his hand and picked up the phone that was vibrating endlessly. "The time has come. Old friend, we have to say goodbye." Bang! The loud sound of parting burst forth, one after another. Bloody holes appeared on Lu Baiyan's body one after another, but no blood flowed out. It was as if they had all been drained long ago. And in his hand, the phone finally connected. However, no sound came from the other side. In that instant, the store manager took a step back in fright. He finally sensed the slender figure that had appeared beside him at some unknown time. It was a teenager. He had a face that was very similar to his son's when he was young, but his eyes and hair were black. There was a happy smile at the corner of his mouth. The child sat on the bar counter and stared at the scene happily. Finally, he looked at Lu Baiyan. "It seems that I came at a bad time. It doesn't matter." Lu Baiyan took a last look at the broken porcelain cup on the table and said, "I just want to finish this cup of coffee." "Are you so reluctant to leave, Lu Baiyan?" The Roman teenager laughed heartily. "Then why don't you stay in this happy nest? Wait for Russell to come to your door and deliver the late liquidation and trial." "But do you care about this kind of thing?" "Actually, I'm not afraid of the trial." Lu Baiyan stroked the sharp stubble of the coffee cup, feeling the slight tingling. "I'm more afraid that no one will come to me," he said. "I'm afraid that they will forget me." No one responded. Only the sharp porcelain shard pierced his index finger, bringing the lonely pain of the forgotten. On the floor behind the counter, the store manager, who was convulsing in pain, raised his head with difficulty, and pressed the fatal switch. There was a cracking sound from Lu Baiyan's body. A faint blue flame was ignited under the skeleton. It quickly rose and spread, covering the old body and engulfing it. It was burned to ashes. However, on the skeleton that was gradually turning to ashes, an ancient jade crown emerged. It was like an ancient cultural relic that had experienced the vicissitudes of life. It did not change color in the burning fire and glowed faintly. Then, on the skeleton, flesh and blood grew again, and a brand new face appeared. It was just like returning to youth. With the blessing of the crown, he shed the cocoon that he had woven for 70 years. His strong body was reborn from the flames. Then, a black shadow rose from under Lu Baiyan's feet. Following the memory and instinct of the past, it formed a solemn suit. How nostalgic! This symbol, Lu Baiyan lowered his head and stared at the Utopia emblem on his chest. He looked at it for a moment and reached out to swipe it away. Thus, there was only a blank space left. Just like that, he broke free from the last shackle. He slowly got up and picked up the packed toast next to him. Finally, he looked around the deathly silent room and said solemnly, "Thank you for accompanying me for so many years. Thank you for the coffee, too." Lu Baiyan wiped the corner of his mouth and said softly, "I'm going on a trip." "Everyone, goodbye." He pushed the door open and left. Holding an umbrella, he walked towards the world engulfed by the cold rain. It gradually disappeared. In the silent town, there were only endless black butterflies crawling out from the cold corpses. Under the nourishment of the blood, they were like a surging tide. After a long winter, they spread their wings, which were covered with giant eyes, and rose from this new hell. They welcomed a new life. Scale powder sprinkled down, and the rain of death fell. 3 hours later, in the roaring helicopter, Huaishur had already connected to a conference call. The surveillance video of the fast food restaurant appeared on the screen in his hand. "This is a message sent by the School Affairs Office half an hour ago." In the earpiece, the vice principal introduced, "It has been assessed as a major vicious incident by the decision-making room of the Central Command Bureau." "Who is this?" Huaishur asked. "Lu Baiyan, a former member of the Utopia." Isaac said, "The survivors after the fall of the heavenly state. Now, it seems that they have completely surrendered to the Golden Dawn. If you ask me, I should have killed him 70 years ago." "Just because he's a lucky survivor?" Russell asked back. "There's no doubt about it. Isaac, we can't kill someone just because they talk to a member of the Golden Dawn, right? Besides, he's in prison. I can't just rush in and cut his neck, right? Kill, kill, kill." On the other end of the phone, Marcus's voice suddenly sounded as he shouted vaguely, "Burn his whole family, beat his mother. Traitors must die. Okay, don't choke. Speak slowly, give me the phone, give me—" There was a mess of voices. "You old fogies are really too much." Isaac suppressed his irritation and continued to explain the details to Huaishur. 70 years ago, he was the only survivor in the core area when the heavenly state fell. Other than him, all his colleagues and students died. Because the relevant experience was vague and inconsistent with other people's reports, he was suspected of colluding with the Golden Dawn and was imprisoned in the Tower of London. In the end, the internal court did not have direct evidence and did not sentence him. After 5 years of imprisonment, he was put under surveillance. Finally, after more than 30 years of investigation, he was allowed to leave London. After that, he lived in a small town in Iceland for 30 years until he killed everyone a few hours ago. "Ha! Speaking of which, he's your colleague," Russell suddenly interrupted. "Huh? What do you mean?" "His stigmata also belongs to the Road of Heaven's Inquisition," Russell said. "Coincidentally, he's the same as you?" Huaishur paused. "The same? Yes, Russell said. It's just that his level is higher than yours. In the past, he was regarded as the only ascendant who could possibly become the new East King. Like you, he's the great judge of heaven's inquisition. Chapter 9, 57. 70 years ago, before the fall of Celestial Kingdom. Liu Baiyan was a ascender in his prime, the leader of the Utopia's logistics and support team, and the great Si Ming, who had great expectations and effort poured into him. After the fall of Celestial Kingdom, everything became completely different from the past. The glorious future disappeared without a trace. All the bright wishes were shattered by the cruel reality and ended gloomily. Some people died of depression, some fell into madness, and more survivors were scattered everywhere. Some chose to step into hell and began a journey of no return. There was no contact since then. Among the vast majority of survivors, some were found to be involved with Golden Dawn and were sentenced. There was also another group of people who were imprisoned and put under surveillance. But did he really betray us 70 years ago? Didn't the dossier say that there was no specific information? Huaishur was confused. Could it be that he was locked up for 70 years just because he was suspicious? What else? Russell asked back. He indeed didn't have direct evidence, but I didn't kill him with my own hands. Wasn't he still alive? And well, after so many years, I even asked someone to plead his innocence back then, although I did lengthen his sentence a little. Didn't he still have life? He was still alive, drinking coffee and watching TV every day. Even if everything he swore to protect was gone, he could still say to others that I was innocent. If you say it's okay, I believe you, and I forgive you. But how can you face those who sacrifice themselves? As a former partner, I was already benevolent enough to tolerate him spending his life in a corner. But now you've seen that he chose to repay me in this way. Imagine Huaishur. Russell sneered. At this time, when celestial genealogy is about to be reorganized, a traitor waved the flag in such a high-profile manner and defected to Golden Dawn in front of the whole world. What kind of consequences will it cause? It was simply black humor that couldn't be more mocking. When everyone used the last of their strength and tried to fight one last time before they died, a dagger stabbed into their back. It brought about the old pain of division. The abscesses and scars that had once fallen in the past were once again exposed in broad daylight. Thus, the old news that had been silent for many years once again made the headlines. Under the teasing and mocking gazes, the silent collapse. I have a question. Huaishur looked at the map and calculated the scale. From Iceland to Granling, and then to the closest exit of the 3 major blockades. It only takes 4 hours after a level 4 ascender's source substance transformation. In other words, he should be dead by now. Why is he still leisurely walking in the present? Could it be that he can't get a taxi? This is a performance. Why, sure. Isaac said, a performance prepared for us by the Golden Dawn. He adjusted the image. Do you see this frame? Pay attention. His hat. The video quickly rewound and finally stopped at the scene of Liu Baiyan burning. A skeleton bathed in flames. There was also the solemn jade crown on his head. The texture and shape made people feel so familiar and intimate. Huaishur couldn't help but move closer and look at it carefully. What is this? National Slayer. Isaac said, the matter of the kingdom of heaven's lineage is like a spirit, engraved by a miracle inherited from the road of heaven's inquisition. That was the national death crown that was snatched away by the Golden Dawn back then. They gave it to Liu Baiyan. TSK, this is just short of a provocation. Huaishur shook his head and sighed. He moved his neck and fingers. I roughly understand. So, what do you want me to do? Catch this thing back. No need to go through so much trouble. Isaac suggested, you can do it more thoroughly. How thoroughly? As thoroughly as you want. Russell said, you have to kill him with your own hands. Why, sure. For the first time, as a teacher, he gave such a straightforward order to his student. He was calm and cold. It can't be anyone else. You have to do it. You have to fulfill your duty as the great Si Ming. He said, regardless of the consequences, regardless of the cost. The new blood of celestial genealogy would kill the traitor of celestial genealogy. The new great Si Ming would kill the old great Si Ming. He would use the back wave to push the front wave to death on the beach. He would use the most straightforward method to prove to the world, to hell, and to the Golden Dawn that this was the determination from the ivory tower. Okay, Huaisher nodded. I know. Maybe there's something else. Huaisher, I know you don't like this kind of work. Russell seemed to smile. He asked, even though he knew the answer, will you be soft-hearted? Is there anyone in this world who thinks that the sword of disaster is a good person? Huaisher shook his head. Come on, Russell, I'm not stupid enough to think that there's anything good about being with the Golden Dawn. So don't worry, I'll do it, and I'll do it decisively. It was a scene that he could still dream of after such a long time. Looking back, everything seemed like it was yesterday. The bombing of Danbois, the cluster bombs that fell from the sky, the merciless executioners, hell on earth, blood and fire, and the sky that was burned red. More than that, there were the innocent people who died. There was also the person who stood in hell and laughed loudly. From that moment onwards, no, even before that, when he had witnessed the tragic scene on the astral, they were enemies, and there was no room for negotiation. Russell, if he wants to go to hell, then he will die in front of the gates of hell. Huaisher said, I promise. Very good. Huaisher. Russell smiled with satisfaction. Then go ahead and do it. I'll get the school guards to cooperate with you. The 2 white doves are on standby. No need. Raymond in front will stay to pilot the helicopter. Huaisher said, I'll choose the rest of the people myself. Okay, everything is up to you. I'll wait for your good news. Just like that, he hung up the phone, full of confidence. It was as if he had already seen the result. The meeting ended, and Huaisher, after a moment of contemplation, took out his mobile phone and dialed Danbois' number. Amidst the roar of the helicopter, he heard a voice from the other end. Little 19? He asked, Are you free? On the other end, the young man was stunned for a moment. He seemed to feel the seriousness in the voice and subconsciously straightened his back. Any time. Very good. Pack your things and get ready. Yuan will come to you later. In 15 minutes, the Rainbow Bridge of the Astronomy Society will be open to you. He said, It's time to get to work. Okay. The cabin in the woods did not talk nonsense. The phone hung up. Ingzhou, Danbois. On the sofa in the living room, the young man who was peeling an apple with his head down did not stop. He carefully peeled off the last bit of apple skin, then divided the apple into several pieces, cut them, and put them into the fruit bowl next to him. He picked up the towel on the coffee table and wiped the saliva of the old man who was watching TV. Take your time, old man. I'm going to work overtime. The girl in the kitchen poked her head out and asked doubtfully, Lin Jun, aren't you going to eat dinner? I have work, Yao Xiang. The cabin in the woods shrugged. I may have to go out. If it's fast, I'll be back in a few days. Do you want me to prepare something for you to eat on the way? The cabin in the woods shook his head and smiled. I ate a lot at noon. It's okay. The teacher will not leave me without food. Then I'll put your portion in the fridge. Yao Xiang warned seriously. You must eat it when you come back, because I'll put double the chili. The cabin in the woods staggered and nodded helplessly. In the end, he did not escape after a brief goodbye. He picked up the coat on the hanger. When he turned around to leave, he heard a voice behind him. "I forgot to bring the thing." The decrepit old man on the recliner said, "I didn't bring it all." The cabin in the woods looked back in confusion. "Aren't you going out?" The old man, who was watching a funny variety show, slowly chewed an apple. When a man goes out, he should at least bring a sword. Along with his words, the silent ancient long knife on the knife rack made a ferocious sound. The cabin in the woods was stunned and could not help but be surprised. "For me? Okay." The old man raised the corner of his mouth and said jokingly, "As long as you dare to take it. Spare me." Feeling the fierce aura brewing in the scabbard, the cabin in the woods stretched out his hand several times as if he was catching a snake. Finally, he carefully grasped the handle and picked it up. "Just lend it to me. Thank you, old man." He waved goodbye, turned around, and pushed the door open. When he walked out of the training hall, he saw the car parked outside, and Yuan leaning against the car. The Shanjun in the scabbard growled angrily and competed with the trembling long knife in the cabin in the woods. The cabin in the woods glanced at her, and his eyes stopped on her wrist. Under the cuff, there was a black track extending. It was like a tattoo with solemn lines. "Chionyo?" The cabin in the woods widened his eyes and sighed. "Wow, he gave it to you? Your family is so generous." Yuan glanced at him as if she was looking at a guy who was making a fuss out of nothing. "He gave it to me, Yazi, but I don't want it. I kept it for Ajao." She said, "Why, your family didn't give it to you." The corner of the cabin in the woods twitched. It hit the sore spot, the knife that he had just rented from the old man. The sword saint was not so nice in an instant. It was not that it was not powerful, but it felt the difference between wild and domesticated. He could not help but burst into tears. It was a fool's dream to expect the elders of the Lin family to keep something good for the younger generation. If there was really something good, not to mention giving it to him, even if he got it, there would be elders who would help him keep it together with the New Year's money. The child was still young. He would think about it when he grew up. Even though the cabin in the woods claimed to be a freeloader, other than the usual gift bag when he left home, he only got a dragon head stick. Comparisons were odious. But he could not let himself be overwhelmed by his junior sister's arrogance. Lin Shurjo blinked his eyes and found a new way to annoy him. He suddenly smiled. "Have you heard? The teacher recruited a new student. It is said that she is from the Russian Federation, Katyusha. I secretly asked someone to look through her photo. She is really slim and beautiful. Hey, do you want to take a look?" Yuan turned around and looked at him, but she did not look at his phone, but at his neck calmly. So the cabin in the woods obediently put away his phone and pretended that nothing had happened. In the long silence, the little hut in the forest rubbed his chin out of boredom. He was eager to try again. "Why don't I give you a show of strength? Let the newcomer know the seniority. You can do whatever you want, but the result will not be good." Yuan calmly corrected him. "Also, I am the eldest. *T. The cabin in the woods was furious. I entered first. Oh, do you want to fight?" Yuan suggested, "Let's use the old method of our two families. The winner gets to talk." The cabin in the woods rolled his eyes. "You don't want to work anymore. It won't take more than a few minutes to beat you." Yuan said, honestly, "If you don't run around, it might be faster. So you better not mess around. If anything happens later, remember to stand behind me." That was then, and this is now. The cabin in the woods raised the rented weapon and laughed. I have the sword of the sword saint here. Who dares to be presumptuous in front of me? In his hand, the long saber that was overflowing with hostility instantly withdrew its sharpness and turned into an ordinary antique. He did not give face at all. The corner of the cabin in the woods twitched. He was about to hold the sword and say a few words to establish a bond between them, but then he saw a rainbow light falling from the sky. Then there was a blur in front of his eyes, and a blizzard hit him in the face. He opened his mouth and swallowed a mouthful of snow. He coughed violently. She shuddered in the frosty wind blowing against her face. He only saw a world of ice and snow. Where is this? Chapter 958. The north of Greenland, the closest place to the Arctic Circle. In the snowstorm, the helicopter slowly stopped rotating in front of them. The hatch opened, and Weischer jumped out, looking at the two of them. Not bad. Good preparation. Oh, teacher, long time no see. Cabin in the woods instinctively rushed up, wanting to hug his thigh and then licking it again and again, relying on his sincerity to maintain the position of the eldest brother. But then he saw the girl coming out from behind Weischer. His eyes suddenly lit up, and he greeted her with enthusiasm, completely forgetting that he had just suggested a show of strength, and smiled warmly. Together with the new junior sister, he could suppress Yuan's expanding arrogance. It's decided. You must be Anna. Don't be nervous. I'm Cabin in the Woods. Call me Master. Puff. Cabin in the Woods, who opened his arms and was ready to give warmth to his teacher, snorted and narrowly blocked Anna's whip kick without warning. His crotch and heart were cold at the same time. Why does this woman have no morals at all? She's like a mad dog. Teacher, can't you find some normal students? Behind him, the sword of the sword saint was motionless, but it made a sound of schadenfreude. Serves you right. Who is this? Anna looked back at Weischer. He doesn't smile like a good person. He looks like a bad guy. Can I kill him? I want to tell you no, but I can try. Weischer folded his arms and leaned against the cabin to watch the fun. You probably won't succeed, and it's very likely that you'll ask for trouble. Try to make more friends. Anya, they're your classmates. They won't hurt you. Huh? I don't think anyone would want to be friends with me. But since you said so, I'll try hard. She put her hands in the pockets of her loose jacket and turned back to smile at the two. My name is Anna. I'm 15 years old. If there's a chance, let's play together. Next time for sure. Cabin in the Woods sighed and waved his hand, already foreseeing his troublesome future. Teacher, do you still remember that we teach classical music? Finally, Anna's eyes finally looked behind her. She saw the figure holding the long box, the calm woman who had been silent from beginning to end. The white wolf and Shanjun's eyes met for a moment. Anna was stunned for a moment and quickly walked closer. She stood on her tiptoes and looked at her face carefully, as if she was sniffing her scent. Her smile became more and more pleasantly surprised. I like you, she said. We are so alike. It was as if he could see a beast sealed in a cage. His desire to fight was suppressed by reason, and he could see part of her essence under her dignified face. He was completely different from the frivolous and casual guy who wandered between the black and white sides. The smell of my own kind. Then let's be friendly, Anna. Yuan reached out and gently touched her hair, as if she was looking at her immature self in the past. You will definitely grow up in the future, just like me. The atmosphere gradually became harmonious. Only the small hut in the forest looked bitterly into the distance in the cold wind. It was as if he could see eldest senior brothers thrown growing wings and flying away. After waving goodbye, he got further and further away from him. He was the one who came first. Immediately, the tears in her heart fell like snowflakes. Incomparably sorrowful, If he was a beautiful girl, he would not be like this. The only thing he could do now was to play to his advantage as a man and hold on to his teacher's thigh. He would work hard to consolidate his position. And before this guy pounced on him, Huaishur had already coughed twice, interrupting his spellcasting action. Since everyone is familiar with each other, let's talk about the work this time. He asked, "Have you all read the information I sent you?" After getting a unanimous answer, Huaishur nodded with satisfaction. "Very good, then I don't need to waste my saliva." He lowered his head to look at the screen of his phone. After confirming the time, he said, "In another half an hour, a train from Nuuk to Sissamith will pass by here. It's loaded with wood, coal, and various goods. Our target is on that train. The destination should be the entrance to hell in the north of Gran Ling." Well, he chose the public transportation method quite arrogantly, and he just needs to put up a sign to tell everyone that I am here. I hope you don't let his efforts go to waste. What about the number of people? The small hut in the forest flipped through the information and asked, "It can't be just one person, right? If it were me, there would be a lot of ambushes. There should be a lot of them, right?" Huaishur thought for a moment and was a little uncertain. After all, they have Golden Dawn behind them, so there should be no shortage of cannon fodder. Anna raised her hand and asked curiously, "What about the passengers?" "There are no passengers," Huaishur replied. "The passengers are all dead. A total of 41 innocent people, 10 minutes after boarding the train. Otherwise, I wouldn't have handed this job to you." His words were so calm, but they made people feel a chill run down their spines. If they joked again, they would be beaten. Anna shrunk her neck obediently and did not speak again. "Then what is our purpose?" Yuan asked. "Sabotage and attack." Huaishur said, "There's no limit to the methods. Just do your best while ensuring your own safety. Kill as many as you can, but if you can't kill even one, then go back and prepare to double your winter vacation homework." The small hut in the forest was silent for a long time and said in disbelief, "Isn't this too vague? Moreover, teacher, you have to consider our ability. That is Golden Dawn. Golden Dawn. What are you afraid of?" "When I was your age, I had seen several destructive elements. Don't be nervous and don't feel pressured. Just do your best." Huaishur pulled out a folding chair from the cabin, opened it, and sat on it, just like the head teacher who invigilated the exam at the end of the year. He looked at the dull faces of the students. "This is your final exam. I hope everyone will have a good result." The small hut in the forest was shocked. "What about you, teacher? Take a break. I'm tired after running for so many days." Huaishur yawned, propped up the hanging stove, lit the fire, and took out a bunch of bottles and cans from his bag. "Everyone, do your best. Teacher will treat you to a picnic when you come back later." Life was not easy. Little 19 sighed. It was the teacher's task. What else could he do? Only Anna suddenly turned back after taking 2 steps and remembered the most important thing. "I have another question." That should be your prey, right?" Anna asked curiously. "But what if I kill him? Won't you be very disappointed?" Huaishur laughed. He was full of expectations. Generation after generation. Isn't that better? Just like that, he watched the students go away. Huaishur sat next to the burning fire, lazily warming himself, staring at the mountains in the distance. "By the way, aren't you worried at all?" Soon, another folding chair was propped up next to the fire, and Raymond, who was checking the equipment in the cabin, came out. He picked up the boiling water in the hanging stove and began to make coffee. "Those are your students, right? You just sent them out like cannon fodder. What if they die? Why don't you worry about something useful, such as whether you will have a share in the picnic in the afternoon?" Huaisher leaned on the chair calmly and narrowed his eyes. I am still alive as a teacher. How can my students die? This was actually the least of his worries. If it were someone else, Huaisher might have some scruples and rush to the front. But when it came to his own students, he could give them all his trust. That was his work. Apart from the cello, it was one of his proudest achievements now and in the future. They had talent and potential, and they should show it. When the time came, as a teacher, he had to give them this opportunity. Besides, it's going to be winter vacation soon, right? He said softly, I have to let the children get a certificate so that they can go home for the new year. Just like that, in the long silence, only the distant sound of the storm and snow falling could be heard. Huaisher listened to the melody in his headphones and hummed in a low voice. He could feel the rapidly approaching aura. Between the mountain ridges, the railway snaked through the snow like a black rope. It gradually tightened, one end connected to the other end, and the other end connected to the other. They slowly drew each other closer. Hatred, killing intent, and even pain slowly brewed in the silence of the falling snow. He opened his mouth, exhaled white gas, and narrowed his eyes. He waited quietly. The exam was about to begin. On the roaring train, the empty passenger compartment was already a mess. Under the continuous chewing, the blood splattered on the carriage slowly flowed down, freezing on the ice-cold window, leaving behind a series of ghastly red frozen marks. Amidst the muffled chanting, the mutated dogs crawled out of the broken corpses one after another, and soon participated in the process of Tao-Tai. Among the corpses, a fanatic in a gray robe with blood on his bare hands was fanatically painting the floor and the carriage with hymns and scenes from the abyss. Hoarse and pious praises sounded continuously. When the fanatic's prayer finally ended, he turned around, revealing a face covered in scars. Like a tattoo, densely packed words wrapped around his exposed skin in circles. But it didn't look like a colorful depiction. Instead, it was like a gap cut by a sharp blade, just a scar that tore the body. Under the gap, there was no flesh and blood, only a surging darkness and an empty shell. In the darkness, there seemed to be a huge structure slowly operating, faintly revealing a maddening outline and structure. But soon, it quickly became completely different. If one stared at it for a long time, one's soul would be sucked into it and become part of the hideous darkness. It was the projection of the enemy of all human intelligence, Apocalypse Boishuan. The blessings from the demonic nature of chaos occupied this body, allowing him to be close to the source of the abyss at all times, becoming the embodiment of hell. The Great Spirit has known and has bestowed a gift. The officiant called, Tattooed Face, turned around and said, "Ha, that kind of sticky thing. How strange." The armored man who watched the whole process held his chin and grinned. He turned around and asked, "In this case, is it enough to attract attention? Do your old friends like such a gift?" "It's not necessary at all." In the seat next to the window, Lu Baiyan answered coldly. He carefully folded the wrapping paper of the finished toast into a small square and pressed it under the cup. Then he slowly raised his head, looked to the side, and said mockingly, "You guys have also fallen badly. Since when did they start to take in this kind of trash?" Chapter 9, 59. It's fine as long as it's useful. The man named Yezi leaned back in his chair and read a book. Without raising his head, he said, "Golden Dawn isn't a penitentiary." "Then what is it?" Lu Baiyan asked. "Destroying heaven, causing the fall of utopia, and stirring up trouble in hell for so many years. What is it for?" "Of course it's to destroy this world." After Yezi clipped the bookmark, he closed the poetry book in his hand and calmly replied, "It literally means that every person, every place with people, and every person's achievements and works will be completely destroyed without leaving a trace. This man, who could be said to be gentle and elegant, was narrating the most brutal words in the world. After a slight pause, he told him meaningfully, "However, before that, some people must face destruction first. All the remnants of Utopia, all those who tried to reorganize celestial genealogy and restore the past, must be destroyed and killed in the most complete way, at all costs, just like Russell's determination. If the two sides could still barely maintain a little bit of harmony in hell in the past, then now it was the most complete break. In the depths of hell, the two campuses under the jurisdiction of Ramanujan and Madame Chun had already started a fierce war with the rulers. Soon, the ivory tower would also pay the price for its arrogance. At this moment, following Yezi's words, pairs of blood-red eyes slowly opened in the carriage that was supposed to be carrying goods and wood. The sleeping legion was awakened. The solidifiers from the Golden Dawn could feel the killing intent that was gradually approaching. At this moment, a scarlet circle suddenly appeared in the sky, for rays of bloody light circled above the circle, and a small dot appeared in the center of the circle. It was like a sniper rifle aiming at the train from afar. The terrifying power at the border was slowly accumulating. It looked down coldly. Dragon summoning flute. This was the true war form of the dragon summoning flute. As the world's largest abyss explorer, it was also the prototype of the ultra-deep hell strike weapon that Utopia had assembled on the eve of its fall. But now, it was not in a hurry to deliver a destructive blow. It was just a show of its existence, to declare this indescribable anger to the traitors of the past. "Look, they're looking at us." Yiji chuckled. However, Lu Baiyan remained unmoved. Instead, he looked out the window at the mountains in the distance. It was as if he could feel the resonance between the two wills. He's there, staring at that distant figure through countless dancing snowflakes and gusts of wind, being able to see the tyrannical light behind the endless storm. His eyes were pierced by that sharp power, and blood vessels appeared. "Is that Russell's son? How dazzling!" Lu Baiyan whispered. "Yes," Yiji said. "In the foreseeable future, it will shine brightly." "No, he won't." In that instant, the National Slayer crown appeared above Lu Baiyan's head. After 70 years of silence, the former great Si Ming stared coldly at his descendant, his replacement. The moment they looked at each other, the only thing that emerged from their hearts was the most straightforward and pure determination. He said, "I'm going to kill him." In that instant, on the mountains, the young man beside the bonfire seemed to have heard his words. He smiled calmly. His fingers that were hanging in front of his knees flicked slightly. He sounded the note that lifted the curtain. Therefore, the deviant ghosts crawling on the train raised their burning red eyes, as if they had sensed something, and stared at the raging snowstorm in front of them. In the vast expanse of bleak whiteness, a fleeting shadow suddenly appeared. Along the endless railway track, he was heading straight for the speeding train. Step by step, it moved forward. Under the windbreaker that danced in the snowstorm, the slender hand dragged a heavy sword, cutting through the wind and frost, causing sparks to fly as the iron blade and the frost rubbed against each other. The train roared. Amid the low sound of countless rails hitting each other, a high-pitched whistle burst forth. On the roof of the train, the deviant ghosts with slender limbs like dwarfs began to wriggle. Vague and sharp sounds brewed in their throats. They swallowed their saliva before they hunted, waiting for someone to dare to climb on this train of death. They competed with each other for the position at the front and were ready to pounce. Compared to the speeding train, the fleeting shadow was so slow, but when it took a step, its footprints seemed to shatter the ice and snow branding the stones and iron under the flying snow. Then, from the sound of the wind, the screams, and the roar of the train, a clear sound suddenly rang out. It sounded like the vibrating strings of a zither. It was the low hum of the sword blade cutting through the flying snow and wind. The mountain lord hissed silently, gnashing its teeth and sucking blood. From the cage, its scarlet eyes stared at the prey in front of it. In the driver's seat, the driver who had turned into a zombie widened his eyes in a daze, feeling the contradiction and conflict between the predetermined order and reality. Right at the front of the track, the person who suddenly appeared raised the heavy sword in his hand and aimed at the speeding train in front of him. Slash! In an instant, a high heat swept over, as if there was lava flowing and gathering on the sword blade, melting all the insignificant flying snow and ice. The sword pierced through the storm, and the moment it broke free from the shackles, it violently destroyed everything in front of it. A violent shock burst out. The terrifying train full of hell creatures collided with the sword blade. What was set off was not a loud bang or a roar, but a sad sound of a zither. A song for the wanderer, the Song of the Wanderer, a classic that had once been written for the gypsies, was being played from the blade of the sword at this moment. Under the torn hood, Yuan raised her eyes, and a blazing light burst out from her eyes. The black totems that were originally hidden under the thin clothes were rapidly expanding, spreading, and climbing up her face, making her pretty and quiet cheeks become cold and solemn. The moment the sound of the zither rang out, the divine mark that had been dormant in her bloodline also awakened, causing the originally pitch-black lines to turn crimson. They grew rapidly, even breaking out of her physical body, and the projection of a slender and curved horn appeared on her forehead. Divine mark, Cheonyo, a fragment peeled off from the flowing dragon vein in the land of Eastern Xia, and crowned as the divine mark formed by the descendants of the dragon. With the never-ending melody of the world and the sound of all things as the carrier, it appeared in the mortal world. At this moment, accompanied by the melody of the sword, a long dragon's roar emerged from the zither's song, shaking the world in front of her and shattering all the insignificant things into dust. The train shook violently, and the terrifying waves spread out. The blazing wind swallowed the flying deviant ghosts, and in an instant they were turned into ashes. And the speeding train was also derailed by this sword. It swerved from its original path and staggered into the rugged ice field, brushing past Yuan. Starting from the front of the train, a huge crack appeared on the body of the train, and quickly spread with the advancement of the sword blade. Like a giant beast whose abdomen had been cut open, a thick and pungent blood gushed out, leaving a red mark that quickly spread across the pale white ice field. Many carriages toppled and rolled, and countless debris flew out from the broken carriages. In the shaking, the tattooed man suddenly raised his hand, and a muffled chant came from behind his cracked face. The originally tilted carriage was suspended in the air by an invisible force, and slowly fell to the ground. Outside the carriage, Yuan raised her hand and pulled off her cumbersome windbreaker, revealing a slim white shirt. Her long hair tied into a ponytail fluttered in the snow wind. It was like a flag. Just take it as a greeting. She asked calmly, "Can you please stop hiding from now on?" In this way, she raised the sword in her hand toward the deviant ghosts and cadaveric dogs climbing out of the countless trains. In the reflection of the sword blade, Mountain King, who had been freed from the shackles, grinned and roared silently, different from the gentle melody of the past. Under the blessing of Cheonyo's divine mark, the performance on the sword blade at this moment became vast and magnificent. The illusory emotions in the zither music transformed into real power, and as she rushed forward, the power was tyrannical. In this way, in an instant, she turned into a whistling meteorite, easily breaking the outer shell of the carriage, and broke into the darkness, bringing with her burning flames. Sweeping, leaving a circular trajectory in the darkness, she cut all the opponents in front of her at the waist. But once again, a shrill cry came from the wind. The sword blade was raised, and the steel collided. Outside the broken carriage, the falling light illuminated the attacker. It's actually a woman. The knight, who was covered in heavy armor, raised his head, holding a halberd and a large shield in his hands, and sneered mockingly, "I didn't expect that such a powerful woman could be cultivated in the present realm." In his hand, the pitch-black shield was once engraved with the symbol of the Eye of Nightmare, but the former emblem had been torn apart and pierced through by a slash. This was the emblem of a betrayer, a former member of the Eye of Nightmare, many of the solidifiers who pursued power and threw themselves into the abyss. Kumar, who was exiled. "Sorry, the main character doesn't seem to have time to deal with you for the time being." He raised his halberd, and Scarlet Eyes mocked. "How about playing with me? But you won't mind if there are more people, right?" As he spoke, pairs of crimson eyes appeared in the carriage behind him. The armored knights walked out of the darkness. On their blood-stained cloaks, the emblem of the sword cross had long turned pitch black. Their solemn armor was covered in rust. The Knights of the Sacred Heart, who had all fallen in the Eastern expedition of hell, reappeared in the world in such an ugly state. Everyone froze, completely crazy from the erosion of the abyss. They had long fallen into monsters. Other than killing and fighting, they had no other pursuits. "Come, little girl." Under the helmet, Kumar's scar curved with a sinister smile. "I will treat you well." What answered him was the sound of steel. In an instant, she crossed a long distance. Mountain King thrust like a hot knife through butter. She tore apart his halberd, shield, armor, and even helmet. Then she skillfully chopped off his head. The corpse fell, and blood spurted out. Yuan stepped over the corpse expressionlessly and walked towards the knights, who were advancing like a forest. She only coldly gave her final evaluation. "Too much nonsense." Chapter 960. In a single exchange, the former elite of the Eye of Nightmares, the traitor who dominated hell and the abyss, was beheaded, without the ability to resist. He welcomed the most complete death. It was not that his skills were not profound enough, nor was it that his strength was not strong enough, but he was essentially a fish on the chopping block. He had found the wrong opponent. In Yuan's hand, the high-pitched sound of metal rubbing against each other could be heard. The iron crystal was multiplying. The originally wide and heavy stigmata relic began to grow for the second time at this moment, when Shanjun's stigmata once again followed the secret ritual, and combined with Cheng Huang's power, it ushered in another explosion. The hungry tiger that had escaped from its cage was greedily gnawing on the blood and bones of the enemy, transforming them into its own mass. Not only did the original handle become slender, but even the sword blade began to grow with the extension of the iron crystal. Its original length of 3 feet and 6 inches rapidly doubled. It was like a long spear. It was no longer in the category of an ordinary heavy sword. Instead, it was more and more exaggerated, tracing back and approaching an even more ancient past, finally forming a ferocious shape. On the blood-stained sword spine, a solemn seal of Yin appeared, bringing with it the blessing of the Dongxia lineage. Shangfang, the majestic symbol that once guarded the true dragon and destroyed the rebels, a miracle born from the brewing of the Dongxia dragon vein. In order to maintain the purity of the dragon vein, it was specially created to deal with the traitors. It was not an exaggeration to call it the dragon blood crystal. If used on the battlefield, it would be the horse-slaying sword that subdued rebels and an army of 10,000. If used internally, it would be the purging armament that cleansed evil and wiped out Treachery. Not only was it effective in the Dongxiao area, it was even enough to cover the entire territory. All those who had betrayed humanity and turned to the abyss would welcome a complete reckoning in front of it. Unless there was a relic of the same level to contend against it, all defenses would be completely destroyed by the dragon veins conferment. Now it's your turn, accompanied by Yuan Yuan's words, in the flying blood. The horse-slaying sword roared and rushed in with its master, cutting through the formation of the knights in front and collapsing. Like a hot knife through butter, it moved forward. The war had just begun. Recklessly rushing forward. It's really the style of the Yuans. On a rock at the foot of the mountain, the little hut in the forest looked at the scene in the distance. He shook his head and sighed. You always talk about your brother, but in the end, you're even braver than him. How can you have the nerve to talk about him like that? Seeing that others were already shining on the stage, he was not in a hurry to participate. They couldn't wait to be in charge of clapping and cheering for their junior sister's brave performance. If he could touch it, he would touch it thoroughly. Unfortunately, the situation didn't allow it, as if sensing the gaze from the top of the mountain, a certain someone who had originally planned to observe from the sidelines sighed. It's done, it's done. It's almost done. His hands paused for a moment. The withered branches and vines that were casually dug out from under the snow eventually formed a human silhouette that was half the height of a man. He looked like a scarecrow. Then, holding the sword saint's sword, he casually cut the wooden block in his hand and scattered it on the snow on the ground. A vivid scene of the accident appeared on the simple sand table. Just like that, it was as if he had succeeded. He yawned and stabbed the sword into the ground. Then, he reached out in the direction of the battlefield. He casually grabbed in the wind, and a wisp of dark color wrapped around his 5 fingers. It spasmed like a worm. In the end, it quickly crawled into the face of the scarecrow, causing the originally casually drawn facial features to become faintly lively. Just like that, they smiled and looked at each other. The little hut in the forest suddenly asked, Name? My name is Stasilis. In the carriage next to the main shaman, a person suddenly spoke. When the others looked at the person who suddenly introduced himself in confusion, they found that he was also at a loss. He didn't understand why the others were looking at him. It was as if he didn't realize that he had just spoken. Then his head split open. From the top to the neck, it was evenly cut into 2 by an invisible sharp blade. Blood spurted out. Under the malice of the victorious Yen curse, everything from the soul to the body was shattered. Only an illusory whisper echoed in everyone's ears. He asked curiously, Name? Alan Menard. Bang! The second head flew from the neck out of thin air. Then it was ravaged by an invisible force in midair. It turned into a fist-sized piece of flesh and shattered on the ground. Soon, a third voice sounded. What's your name? Marco Rapp. Then, the person whose name was dug out from the soul was cut in half from the middle of his waist. Invisible malice kept falling from the sky, with the support of the Grand Swordsman's sword. The small wound caused by the victorious Yen curse expanded into a terrifying killing that even armor couldn't resist. The classical music classroom's unique traditional art began again. One, and one after another, until the book in Yeji's hand unhappily closed. Pack! The bridge of malice was cut off by an invisible force. Then 100 times stronger backlash flowed against the current, causing the scarecrow in front of the little hut in the forest to explode in an instant. Raging flames ignited from the broken branches, emitting black smoke from the burning souls. Driven by hatred, the broken souls crawled out from the burning branches and launched a counterattack against the little hut in the forest. Then he stuffed it back inexpressionlessly. Then he skillfully pasted a talisman on it and sealed it. Just like that, the scarecrow was burned into a pile of ashes. After failing so many times, he naturally had experience. However, there was a dark silhouette on the train slowly, looking over here with cold eyes. Archbishop Bushuan, tattooed face. Tisk, did I draw too much hatred? The little hut in the forest sighed softly. I didn't want to be the MVP. But the figure surrounded by blood suddenly drifted in the air. In a flash, it had already crossed thousands of meters. Then it flashed again. The gap between them began to shorten rapidly. It sped over. The corner of the little hut in the forest's eyes twitched. He subconsciously turned back and shouted toward the mountain, "Teacher, can I hand in my paper in advance?" In the middle of the mountains, the figure holding a coffee cup and leaning against the fire looked down at him. It seemed to be a smile. It made him foresee a tragic future where he would be super doubled and doubled. Suddenly a big question. You must give me extra points. The little hut in the forest sighed in distress. He touched his pocket and found a yellow paper bag folded into a triangle among a pile of miscellaneous items, such as his mobile phone, MP3 player, earphone cable, power bank, mobile Wi-Fi, wallet, keyring, and so on. He held it between his fingers. His lips opened and closed, whispering silently. In an instant, Tattooed Face's ears seemed to be filled with the murmurs of countless people. There was a cacophony of voices, curses, roars, and roars of thousands of people. In the end, the drifting voice turned into a roar, overlapping in one place and vibrating endlessly in his soul. 3 7 stars, holding a sword to slay spirits, Zhenxing to bind hands, North deity to collect souls, evil spirits, and monsters. I swear not to listen. Those who listen to my curse, their heads will be broken, and their brains will shatter like dust. Bang! The paper bag in the little hut in the forest hand suddenly exploded, and a flame rose, accompanied by the final chant, urgent as the law commands. The moment the paper bag burst, Tattooed Face, who flashed in midair, moved in unison. Behind the countless pitch-black cracks on his face, a blazing flame suddenly erupted, and his head rapidly expanded. A low, muffled sound, like a balloon bursting, burst forth. The originally ferocious head had already exploded like fireworks, but there was no blood or bone visible. Instead, a viscous darkness gushed out from within. The squirming darkness crawled out from the neck, letting out a high-pitched hiss and roar. He's still not dead. The little hut in the forest didn't have time to feel heartache as he heard the strange sounds around him. In the withered forest, the ground was churning like liquid. Countless cadaveric dogs crawled out from it and rushed towards him. Soon, they were torn apart in the air. The cut was as smooth as a mirror. Only the blood dyed the snow scarlet, like a blooming peony. Beside him, the blade that had pierced into the soil buzzed. In midair, Tattooed Face quickly swooped down. Where the head used to be, countless eyes opened in the squirming darkness, shooting evil light at him. The curse bullets fell like a storm, and the entire forest instantly turned into a land of death. The withered trees cracked, and countless worms crawled out from within. The snow on the ground seeped with countless pitch-black colors, and the thorns and vines appeared to have the texture of flesh and blood. In the midst of the evil curse, the little hut in the forest blinked undamaged. It was completely fine. Behind him, the phantom of the promoted minister stretched its snake body contentedly, as if Weisher had entered hell, feeling a burst of spontaneity and comfort. But after witnessing the opponent's power of transforming this area into hell by merely imitating a few evil eyes, he could feel the huge gap between them. This was the accumulation of evil thoughts and curses. No matter how skilled a spellmaster was, when fighting with Bushuan's priests, it was inevitable that his hands and feet would be tied, let alone an officiant who could be regarded as a spawn of hell. He was completely restrained. How the hell was he going to fight? And Tattooed Face had already raised his palm towards the little hut in the forest not far away. His 5 fingers quickly cracked, distorted, and turned into tentacles burning with black flames, covering the sky and covering the earth, shrouding over. One could clearly see the squirming suction cups and ferocious mouth parts at the tip of the tentacles. The little hut in the forest felt his scalp go numb. After a moment of consideration between a French military salute and a strategic shift, he came up with the safest solution and pulled out the long sword stuck in the ground beside him. He slashed forward, but that awkward posture, even the darkness in Tattooed Face's abdomen couldn't help but sneer. This is the student of the King of Donbois? Is this the posture of a fire-burning stick? You seem to be making me laugh. But then he couldn't laugh anymore, because a pale white iron light appeared in the air, crisscrossing, flashing and disappearing. Countless burning tentacles were broken at the waist, and intense pain spread. And in the midst of the dissipating black flames and flying snow, the little hut in the forest raised its face. Her originally lively and bright eyes were rapidly becoming turbid and dim. It was covered with white mist. In an instant, the lazy young man turned into a dying old man, but there was an incomparable sharpness shooting out from the eyes, looking disdainfully at everything in the world. Chapter 9, 61. In Sword Saint Shangchuan's life, he had many swords. When he was a nameless teenager, he used the nameless ancient sword that he inherited from his father. When he was 24 years old, it was broken by a strong enemy and could not be repaired. Therefore, it was sealed and not used, and was placed in the dojo. Later, after he inherited the sect, he used the famous sword that was passed down by the previous masters, Guan Shiji Orthodox. After that, he had a breakthrough, and used the Yuanshi Divine Mark, Knee Cutter, and Knee Cutter. When he left the palace at the age of 50, he returned the 2 weapons and changed them to the Chidori that was now passed down to Yao Xiang. After that, because of various reasons, he changed his swords several times. Every divine weapon, because of the Sword Saint's use, shone with new brilliance and created one legend after another. In the end, the sword that the Sword Saint in the dojo used became an ordinary longsword. At most, the material was a little sturdy, but it was not known for its sharpness and fierceness. Perhaps part of the reason was that returning to the original and not relying on external objects were said in the streets, but more of the reason was that it was not necessary at all. He no longer needed to hold some peerless sword and fight to the death with others. He had already reached the peak. Now, what he needed was just a teaching whip to instruct his disciples. If it was not for the fact that the dojo advocated the duel of real swords, it would not matter if it was a bamboo blade. Now, the teaching whip was held in the hand of the little house in the forest. It was not long, not short, and ordinary, just right. However, it was precisely this perfect longsword that caused Tattoo Face to feel a chill run down his spine. It was not the sharpness of the blade, nor was it the speed or power, but it was someone who had once entrusted on the blade all that he had learned in his life. In the long 50 years after being wielded by the Sword Saint, soaked in supreme tear, and entrusted with the longing and yearning of countless disciples, this sword had become the embodiment of the dojo. The heart of the sword was formed naturally. Simply put, the account was taken over. Power leveling online. At this moment, under the observation of countless evil eyes, the little house in the forest became incomparably strange. The left half of the body was still the same as before, but the right half of the body that was holding the sword began to rapidly evaporate, losing its own outline and rising like a flame. That half of the face also became hollow and blurry. Countless faces kept appearing as if it was possessed by evil spirits. Young man, old man, child, Old Woman, Dark Flow, Nitten Ryu, Sunset Flow, Bright God Dream Flow, Natural Mind Flow, North Star One Blade Flow, Great Stone Divine Shadow Flow. All kinds of sword techniques flowed freely. Even their auras changed unpredictably. Tisk, it's just a mere materialization. It's not worth a single strike. A pair of turbid eyes looked down at the opponent in front of him in disdain. His voice became hoarse and old. Are you not coming over? Then I'll reluctantly go over to you. Just like that, he casually took a step forward. However, that indomitable and terrifying aura seemed to have brought death right before his eyes. Boom! The darkness boiled, as if it was reacting to stress. Countless hideous limbs spread out from the broken body. The tattooed face's body changed rapidly, and in the end, his entire body faded away in the surging darkness. All that was left was a ball of darkness that was as viscous as ink surging, outlining the outline of a human figure. After the evil eyes opened, they shot out evil light. However, there was no trace of the hut in the forest. Out of all the skills that Weisher had taught him, this was the U-step that he was most proficient at, and also the most proficient at this moment, under the enlightenment of the Sword Saint, it was fully activated. It was already not inferior to Weisher's speed. In an instant, it was very close, and it slashed towards the darkness in front of it. Even if it was an ethereal origin substance, it still cut it in half. The tattooed face roared, and the darkness split in half. Countless hands stretched out from it and grabbed the sword of the hut in the forest. They held it tightly, not allowing the slightest bit of struggle. Then the darkness surged, and countless vicious curses spewed out from it. But at the same time, the hut in the forest abandoned its sword without any hesitation. It raised its hands and pressed them towards the boiling darkness. Dark and vicious runes appeared on its 10 fingers. The alchemy array implanted in its body was activated, and a vortex that seemed to lead to eternal night formed in the center of its palms. Behind the hut in the forest, the shadow of the promotion minister also slowly rose. It smiled maliciously at it. Finally, I caught you. In the next moment, the creepy chewing sound came from the hands of the hut in the forest, and countless strange sounds like the gnawing of evil beasts rose one after another. The promotion minister's slender snake body was like a giant python, tightly entangled with the tattooed face, and swallowed the essence from hell. Painful screams sounded. There was also an angry hiss. It sounded like a roar. Look at what you're saying. The hut in the forest smiled innocently. Cannibalism is a characteristic of the Lin family. It must be tasted. Don't tell me that people of the Lin family rely on others to fight. No way, no way, no way, no way, right? Accompanied by his words, countless sharp iron lights appeared from the vortex, like the teeth of a shark. They intersected and rubbed against each other, and sparks burst out. This was a secret ritual personally engraved by the current torch dragon. After swallowing the evil energy of thousands of fierce blades in the dojo and eating the evil essence of countless cooking demons, it finally completed the abyssal curse. Its peace is darkness, its sight is light, it doesn't eat or sleep, and it listens to the wind and rain, compared to the god of Mount Zhong who swallowed storms and tides and controlled dawn and night. And evil, this was just a small matter. But the same was its insatiable greed and the ferocity of a predator. It swallowed all evil until there was nothing left. In front of the Lin family, he still dared to expose his soul without any protection. How daring was he to do that? Was this the Hell Charity Association's service of delivering food to the door? Love, love. Now, the darkness had turned into a vortex, and it was constantly being pulled deeper into the darkness. Under the evil energy of countless sharp blades, all the origin substance's structure was shattered, and it fell into the promotion minister's stomach. The last trace of the tattooed face disappeared just like that. In its place was the swollen face of the hut in the forest, so red that it was almost purple. It was too weak, and the amount was too much. It couldn't be digested at all. If it continued like this, it would only explode. Since that was the case, the hut in the forest took a deep breath, pointed in the direction of the train in the distance, and opened its mouth, might as well spit out a little. And so, under the intensification of evil, all the origin substance welcomed the most violent qualitative change, quickly turning into an extremely unstable state. It put in a little bit of resentment, a little bit of jealousy, and then a little bit of its carefully extracted arrogance and unlimited supply of fear, as well as a sea of anger. Finally, it poured in most of the origin substance and power of the tattooed face. Like this, a pot of instant curse soup was ready. Following the ignition of the cursed flames, it exploded with a bang. A thick black and purple stream of light shot out from the promotion minister's mouth, flying into the distance. In an instant, it pierced through the dancing snow, flew past the flying blood and frost, crossed the battlefield, tore through the carriage, passed through the corpses and slaughter, and exquisitely brushed past Yuan Yuan's hair, flying even further ahead. All the armored knights in front of it were instantly scattered into flying ash. After flying in a straight line for more than 10 kilometers, it left behind layers of cracks. Finally, it flew towards Lu Baiyan's face by the window. Yin and Yang 3 combinations, which is Yin and which is Yang. As he softly chanted, the dignified crown flickered and disappeared. An invisible wall appeared in front of the cursed light, isolating the origin substance curse from the outside world. But then the mountain lord roared. Amidst the thunderous roar, the young girl trampled on the broken armor, smashing through the cabin in front of her. She turned around in midair and threw the weapon in her hand in Lu Baiyan's direction. Lightning flashed. Amidst the leaping lightning, Shang Fang's horse-slaying sword hummed, directly piercing through all obstructions, flying towards Lu Baiyan's face. Then, it suddenly stopped in midair. The lightning of the army dissipated without a trace. Between Lu Baiyan's 2 raised fingers, the flying sword froze in midair. After being entrusted with the Chonyo seal and all the power in his body, the transformed mountain lord sword actually couldn't advance an inch. Young people these days, Lu Baiyan understood and shook his head disinterestedly. They're biting off more than they can chew. I'm sorry, Teacher Lu, I don't know the rules. I'm just randomly attacking. In the distant, desolate forest, the small hut in the forest suddenly laughed. He crouched down, his 5 fingers pressing towards the shadow in front of him, strangely breaking through space. His 5 fingers, filled with evil and poisonous curses, actually stretched out from the shadow of the sword. Then, he grabbed towards Lu Baiyan's shadow. He didn't care about martial ethics and chose to sneak attack a 96-year-old old comrade. He firmly grabbed his throat and clenched it tightly. It caused a pitch-black handprint to appear on his neck. Traces of scriptures rapidly expanded, multiplied, and then quickly cracked. It only had enough time to grab him, for an instant. But in that instant, a silhouette suddenly enlarged in the window covered in layers of frost. Through the refraction of the frost mirror, the Maiden of Frost broke out of the mirror. In her hand, a sparkling and translucent dagger appeared. The blade, which seemed to be carved out of crystal and frost, overflowed with the light of countless desires. It targeted souls, enough to corrupt all origin substances and cause all consciousnesses to fall into madness and split apart, condensing into a single line. She grasped this crucial opportunity. 6 attacks stabbed down at the same time. Supreme Tier, Dark Moon. Overestimating yourself. In that instant, Lu Baiyan sighed softly, and a pitch-black shadow appeared behind him. It was difficult to see the change in that instant. Only the sound of countless cracks could be heard overlapping in one place. Anna's dagger fell apart, and the sword of victory dissipated with a wail, returning to the case. The small hut in the forest hurriedly pulled his hand out of the shadow. It had already been burned to a crisp, and the skin was cracked, and pitch-black blood flowed out. Lu Baiyan, however, was unharmed. "If I kill you like this, will your teacher be sad?" He grabbed Anna's neck and lifted her into the air, his fingers slowly tightening. But soon he seemed to hear a sneer from the distant mountains. Then in his hand, the struggling young girl turned into ice crystals, shattering inch by inch and scattering. In the carriage even further away, she once again appeared behind Yuan Yuan in a flash, and together with Yuan Yuan, they turned into dancing snow and flew into the distance. But before she left, she turned around and smiled at him proudly. She was like a white wolf running away, with a lamb in its mouth. Behind Lu Baiyan, an illusory conduit silently broke, the replenishment of origin, substance, essence, and divinity from the land of dreams was quietly cut off. Chapter 962. Someone saw through it. Yiji shook her head, regretfully. She pulled out the bookmark that broke at the same time and threw it away. "How's the recovery? Do you need me to get another one?" "No need." Lu Baiyan rubbed his wrist and answered coldly, "About 90%. That's enough." After being imprisoned for a long time, this was the first time he felt so full. His divinity was bursting, and his divine mark was operating freely. At the same time, he also felt a resonance that was almost within reach. The other great, Si Ming, the one who replaced everything and took away all of his future. "How dazzling," he whispered, so dazzling that it's detestable. Why was someone still able to shine after he fell into hell? "Let's begin, Yiji," he said. "Isn't the stage you want right in front of you?" "One more step, and there's no turning back." Yiji asked, "Have you thought it through?" 70 years ago, I didn't make a choice. 70 years later, I have to live with clarity. I've long stopped thinking about turning back." Lu Baiyan was silent for a moment, then suddenly sneered. "What's the use of a spotless inkstone, no matter how white it is? It's just a decoration." "Then let's begin." Yates smiled. "The journey to Byzantium." At that moment, the pages in his hand slowly opened, and the poems written by the peerless poet flowed out like water. The man's figure gradually became illusory, turning into countless flowing runes that quickly spread out. Yi Ji, the image spirit from the fallen heaven, revealed her true appearance here. The poem from hell, distorting the world in front of him. This is not the kingdom of the old, young people embracing each other. A hoarse voice came from the void. In the dying generation, birds sing in the trees. Fish, beasts, or birds praise in the summer everything that is born and dies. Here summons the arrival of hell. In the blink of an eye, the cold wind on the snowy plain became more violent. A terrifying roar rose from the crust in the distance. The projection from hell surged behind the clouds, outlining the silhouettes of countless behemoths. And at the end of the mountains, the track traces began to warp. Following Yiji's disappearance, a huge door slowly appeared. The curtains slowly opened on the hellish stage, and the gate to the other side of the paradise opened. In the snowfield that was littered with corpses, the derailed train roared like a beast. More viscous blood spurted out from the cracks, and the deep sound of bones growing could be heard. In the end, they opened their eyes as if they were alive. Once again, they began to move forward along the tracks. Towards hell, the whistle was like a shrill laugh, tearing everyone's eardrums. "Let me see what you're made of. Why, sure." Lu Baiyan stood in front of the broken window and stared coldly at his opponent. Or are you just going to sit there and watch me leave? Between the mountains, in the dancing snow, the water in the furnace above the bonfire boiled again. A sweet and fragrant aroma rose from it, making one's appetite whet. It smells so good. Raymond sniffed the fragrance and asked curiously, "What did you make?" "A red cabbage soup I learned from a priest of the Russian Federation a few days ago. It's simple and convenient, most suitable for picnics and best for entertaining guests." Huaisher sat in a chair, exhaled at his fingers, and answered with a smile. "If you want the soup to be thick, the secret is to simmer it over a small fire, control the temperature, and work slowly to produce fine work." He said, "Patience is a virtue." Along with his words, wisps of red steam rose from his pores and spread in the cold wind, bringing about an intoxicating heat. The bonfire burned more and more fiercely. The crackling sound of wood pieces in the flames overlapped and blended into the sound of the wind, as if someone was roaring in the distance. The roaring sound was faintly discernible in the wind and gradually spread. The fire became hot, but the color turned black, as if all the darkness in the world had condensed into a flame, burning wantonly, tormenting the cauldron of hell, causing the disaster in it to sublimate into a new crystal. As a result, the mist dancing in the pores became more and more bright and scarlet, like blood. When the thunderous roar rose from the mountains, the wind and snow became denser and more violent. The extremely cold storm seemed to crawl on the ground, rolling up a large amount of snow powder and dancing in the air. In the end, it carried the sweet fragrance spreading around the bonfire and whizzed down to the world below. As a result, the pale color seemed to be ignited by that wisp of steam, turning into blood red. Between the sky covered by gray clouds and the ground covered by frost, that wisp of blood quickly spread and multiplied, like oil paint falling into a water tank, dyeing the colorless wind with its own color. At first, it was just a thin wisp, but the lower it went, the greater the killing intent that had been cooking in the heart for a long time. In the end, under the stirring of an invisible spoon, the rolling wind and snow turned into a violent and surging wave of blood. The crimson storm was ignited by the curse. Everything in its path was charred black by its rage. In the world that returned to dead silence, only the roar of the storm spread. The scene of the end of the world so coldly descended on everyone's heads, engulfing everything. At the foot of the mountain, the cabin in the forest raised its head in shock, feeling the terrible malice and curse in the storm that was beyond its imagination. It could not help but tremble. It was not trembling because of this terrible scene, but because it sensed the gap between itself and its teacher, and felt a strong sense of frustration and shock. It was unimaginable what kind of malice was added to the cauldron of torment to be able to brew such a terrible curse from countless disasters. At this moment, the blood-colored storm descended. It blotted out the sky and covered the earth. Between heaven and earth, only the whistling of the storm that was like the sound of swords was left. Countless cold light surged from the blood-colored storm, moving ferociously. Wherever it passed, all the earth cracked inch by inch, and all the wild forests collapsed. The towering trees flew together with the snow, snapped, and cut. Countless green pine needles quickly turned black, turning into little sparks that surged within. In an instant, the entire train was engulfed. Destruction rose from the cauldron and fell from the sky. Countless high-pitched and ear-piercing sounds burst out from the storm. Not only were the tracks falling apart under the ravages of the storm, but cracks also appeared on the ferocious train, and blood spurted out. The cold light pierced through the air, tearing the cabin door, and flew past the corner of Lu Baiyan's eyes, leaving a bloody red mark on his cheek. The curse surged, seeping into the wound, deep into the bone marrow, and quickly dissipated without a trace. The cracked wound wriggled, and a butterfly crawled out. It slowly spread its wings, transforming from the cocoon. On the pitch-black wings, the black eyes were dyed with scarlet red. The train shook violently, and countless fragments fell from it, quickly shattering in midair, turning into stone cocoons one after another. Countless butterflies flew out from the cocoons, spreading their wings. Against the blood-colored storm, they rushed into the sky. Like fish in water, they soared in the curse, rapidly transforming themselves and the environment, turning the curse that could destroy everything into a nourishment pool for their own growth. Under great sea mings, hell seemed to have turned into a paradise. Countless black butterflies were like ink flowing slowly in the sky, the earth and the sky. Wherever they passed, traces were left behind, turning the entire world black and white. It was like a painting of hell drawn by splashing ink. That was the large group of black butterflies that he had cultivated, transformed from the solidified essence of hell. At this moment, heaven and earth turned into a white paper, and the train outlined by the wild and thick ink moved with a loud rumble. It passed through the violent blood-colored storm and sped towards hell. At that moment, a loud sound burst out from the sky. The train suddenly shook. A section of the carriage was cut in half from the middle. Then, a second loud sound burst out, whistling from the side, tearing apart the surging sea of butterflies and violently lifting the roof of the carriage. All that was left was a streak of sharp iron light that swept across the sky. A paper cutter violently cut open the freehand painting in front of it. Everything was falling apart rapidly. In the roar that sounded like cannon fire, a pair of iron wings spread out from the blood-colored storm, and countless crows circled in the sky. Those hungry predators looked down coldly at everything below their feet. When Weisher raised his finger, an angry red light gathered from one of the crows. After attaching the origin form equipment to it, the iron crow whistled and dove towards the ground. Like a cannonball, it rubbed against the air and burned until it was red. It carried the solidified anger and fell from the sky. The dancing ink was defeated, and layers of ripples were formed. Then, the burning iron crow exploded, and countless fragments spread out, shattering the entire carriage again. Soon, in the cage of dreams, a strand of origin form was reborn, and the excited iron crows rose from the pool. After shaking off the water droplets on their bodies, they squeezed in front of the television and began to watch the broadcast provided by their companions. Some even went to the entrance of the cage and began to line up again. This roller coaster ride was exciting. When Weisher raised her hand again, hundreds of flames rose from the flock of crows. It was no longer a small skirmish like before. Anger, sadness, compassion, virtue, pain, resentment, fully loaded. The black and white world was torn apart by the surging light. The sky also changed colors according to Weisher's will, harmonizing with each other. When the chaotic colors surged, everything was shrouded in the shadow of despair. At this moment, in the mountains, when Weisher's raised finger slid down, thunder that penetrated the sky, and earth burst out from this world of death covered in ice and snow. Mastery Symphony. Since Helios returned, this was the first time Weisher tried to go all out in a battle. The origin form that had undergone a qualitative change had already shrouded the entire snowfield with the light. When the long resonance finally ended, what descended from the sky was the fury of the entire ice and snow wilderness. The sound of nature descended. Chapter 963. It was as if someone had suddenly pressed the mute button in the middle of the movie. Everything lost its sound. One could only see streaks of intense light continuously descending from the sky. They were silent, and even the loud sound was compressed into an inch of destruction. Then, what was set off were thousands of violent waves that swept in all directions. Waves of air surged, and countless white snow swayed painfully in the wind, forming a new storm. It blew in all directions, violently uprooting everything on the ground and throwing it away. The world was like a resonating box, trembling under the invisible bow. What followed was a full and impassioned echo of hell. After layers of protection, the cabin in the forest at the foot of the mountain subconsciously wanted to press Anna behind him, but Yuan and Anna held hands and pressed him to the ground. They could only feel the terrible residual power from afar through the painful convulsions of the earth. Through the constantly cracking bunker, they could see a corner of the brutal destruction. In the melting ice and snow, the cabin in the forest sucked in a mouthful of cold water and coughed violently. What the F***CK is going on? Teacher, did someone hack your account too? Could it be that someone took a risk and got the password for the space-based orbital weapon of the Astronomical Society? This is going to be a prison in the trench. Even though he knew that the possibility of this was extremely small when he thought of his teacher's vast and strange connections, he actually felt that it seemed that it was somewhat possible. But soon, such an absurd conjecture was erased by himself. Behind the bunker, the three of them looked at each other and saw the horror in each other's eyes. At this moment, what Yuan felt was the majestic rhythm of heaven and earth. What the cabin in the forest experienced was the cruel cooking of heaven and earth that wanted to put the whole world in a cauldron. What Anna smelled was the malice born from the constant changes, intensification, and qualitative changes. When everything was integrated into one, such a terrifying scene was born. And at that moment, what Woodman in the reflection understood was a chill from the bottom of his heart. Such a brutal method of controlling heaven and earth and keeping everything under the same axis. If he had not already received the news of death, he would almost suspect that Yingfangzhou had been reborn. But now, the destruction that was no different from Yingfangzhou had come again. Is this another trick of the Calamity musicians? Lu Baiyan's eyes were bloodshot. It was as if it had been ignited by the fire in the sky. The projection of the National Slayer crown appeared in an instant. The surging black color quickly rose and spread, blocking the path of the destructive flowing light. There was a constant stream of dancing inky colors bursting out. The sea of darkness boiled rapidly under the piercing of the light. Following Lu Baiyan's command, it once again rose up and swelled like an injured wild beast. It roared in anger as it devoured everything in its path. Then, the invisible brush dipped in ink rapidly drew countless outlines in the sky. It was as if thousands of mountains and rivers had emerged from the ink, forming layers of barriers. The Doomsday painter of the Muse Club. At this moment, the scenes of hell that had been engraved in his soul in the past reappeared once again. The eternal beauty in the painting collided with the fleeting destruction, setting off a new round of intense changes. When the dancing ink finally dissipated, the originally innumerable butterflies had become extremely sparse. And on the tracks that had long since ceased to exist, there was no longer any trace of the train. In the burning ruins, Lu Baiyan lowered his head expressionlessly, peeking at his burnt cuffs and the scratches on his arms. Other than that, he was intact. On his head, the projection of the ancient crown appeared again. Then, the sparse butterflies swelled again, and endless inky colors spread out in all directions. The National Slayer crown. In the office of the vice principal of the Ivory Tower, Russell's projection watched the scene from the scene and sighed softly. As expected of the authority of the Road of Heaven's Inquisition, the enhancement of the Road of Heaven's Inquisition is too exaggerated. As the symbol of the Road of Heaven's Inquisition, and a miracle engraving specially designed and created for the future Dongjun. The National Slayer crown did not adhere to the situation of the crown. Instead, it existed in the form of a book that recorded events. Its function was not complicated. No, it could even be said to be simple and crude. In addition to the protection of the user, the enhancement of divinity, and the sustenance of the correction value of the Road of Heaven's Inquisition, there was only one function. By consuming the correction value, the large group of stigmata bestowed by the sublimator would all be raised by one level. In other words, as long as one wore the National Slayer crown, one would be able to obtain a large group of stigmata that exceeded one's limit in advance. If Huaishur, as the great Ximing, could only distribute the stigmata of 3 young Ximing, and at the same time, each of the 3 young Ximing's stigmata would be distributed to 3 mountain ghosts, then Lu Baiyan would be able to receive the treatment of the Dongjun in advance and distribute the stigmata of 3 great Ximing. Then, from these 3 great Ximing's stigmata down, not only would he have more than twice as many people as Huaishur, but he would also have 2 of the same level of combat power. Even if the large group of stigmata was generally weaker than the sublimator, Huaishur was not facing 1/4 stage, but 3/4 stage. This was the most terrifying part of the National Slayer crown. It increased the original human wave tactic of the Road of Heaven's Inquisition by 3 times. And now, Lu Baiyan was finally serious. At this moment, when the long prelude finally came to an end, under the majestic surging sea of ink, Lu Baiyan moved forward step by step, withstanding the countless cannons and moving forward, towards hell. When the continuous and terrifying cannons finally stopped, the ground was already devastated. The howling wind finally stopped, and when the flying snow fell, he finally saw the gate to hell in the distance, and the figure that was blocking the gate without him knowing. In the wind and snow, he stood there holding an axe. The fire at the corner of his mouth flickered. Just like that, he hummed a vague song and tapped his fingers lightly on the axe handle, letting the distant melody flow in the wind. It was quiet and peaceful. The wolf hunter was waiting quietly. He scattered his fighting dogs, letting them force the prey to constantly reveal flaws and run for their lives. Then, he slowly closed the encirclement, leaving only the final path. Just like that, he waited for the prey to walk into the trap. When the lone wolf, who had nowhere else to go, looked at him coldly, he raised his face and revealed a warm smile. "Looks like I don't need to introduce myself." Huaishur looked at him and sighed. "You're so well prepared. Are you sure you have me?" "Yes." Lu Baiyan nodded coldly. "Does this world need a second great Ximing?" "What a coincidence, I think so too." Huaishur nodded empathetically. At that moment, the killing intent between them slowly spread in the surging origin substance, colliding with each other, shooting out countless sparks in the void. The fate of great Ximing collided with each other. Divinity surged, but for some reason, Huaishur seemed to be in a daze, as if she was thinking about something else. Suddenly, she asked, "That's right, what do you think of my family's crow? Although it's a bad thing, I still miss it after not seeing it for a long time. Do you have anything you want me to convey?" Lu Baiyan didn't answer. He couldn't be bothered. His expression was calm and cold. It was just a moment of confusion, but it didn't escape Huaishur's eyes. He didn't understand what he was talking about, and he didn't understand why he would ask this out of the blue. He also didn't understand why his smile suddenly became so mocking. It was as if there was some rare treasure that he didn't know about. At that moment, the wind and snow were torn apart by the blazing flames. That pair of burning eyes was already very close to him. Yu Bu rushed forward and slashed his axe towards the level 4 sublimator in front of him, who was in his peak state. Great Ximing sighed, regretfully. "Then, aren't you going to lose for sure?" Boom! The empty wasteland seemed to have welcomed a tide of people in an instant. The two of them didn't move at all, but countless phantoms appeared in the wind and snow, disappearing in a fleeting manner, accompanied by countless metallic lights. It was so ferocious that it sent chills down one's spine. It was as if countless swords and blades grew out from the snow after the spring rain. It was difficult to distinguish the flashing figures. One could only see the dark torrent sweeping out from behind the two of them. All the phantoms of the two great Xi-Ming were released in an instant. As shadow burial flashed and appeared, they began to fight without retreating in this short distance. Only bits of ink and broken metal pieces fell from the sky. Soon, the phantoms released by Huaishur were covered by the torrent that was more than 10 times stronger. Shadow incarnation? Lu Baiyan shook his head and raised his palm. Huaishur, 70 years ago, I was tired of this trick. There's still a lot for you to learn. Accompanied by his words, two phantoms that were identical to Lu Baiyan appeared on both sides of him from the surging ink. The buff of the National Slayer crown reappeared, and the origin substance of the 3 level 4 great Xi-Ming spread out violently. Then, a low voice overlapped and spread out. Heaven-style horizontal, yang separation death. That was the power inherited from the path of heaven's inquisition. Huaishur had not crossed the 4th level, so he could not use it at all, nor could he come into contact with it. Combined with the memories of the National Slayer crown that belonged to this path. Divine mark, heaven's inquisition. Originating from the ancient records of Eastern Xia's history, it contained the doubts and hopes of countless people. After combining the miracles of the world and the reflections of the gods, it formed countless applications that were almost all-encompassing. The secret ritual was activated, heaven-style vertical and horizontal. If the yang qi dissipated, death would befall. All things had their own rules, and once the origin substance that represented life dissipated, what awaited them was only the end. At this moment, waves of darkness gushed out from the ruins of end projection behind Lu Baiyan. Wherever it passed, all of Huaishur's phantoms were wiped out, and the origin substance within was completely devoured, returning to Lu Baiyan's ruins of end. It had become his power. With the support of the National Slayer crown, great Xi-Ming, who had grown to the limit, easily crushed Huaishur's power. Then he began his cruel plundering. But then his expression changed abruptly. He couldn't help but widen his eyes. On both sides of him, the two great Xi-Ming's phantoms shook violently, and several gaping wounds appeared on their bodies. The light of steel surged out from within. It was like a seed of steel had sprouted from the flesh, tearing apart the phantoms. Countless crimson blades formed by overlapping crow feathers pierced out of the phantoms. In an instant, he was injured. Lu Baiyan opened his mouth in shock and coughed out a mouthful of blood. Then he saw Huaishur's pitiful gaze. After being locked up for 70 years, was there something wrong with his brain? Daring to eat the food of the cooking demon, did he really think he was Guashuk? You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.